They say you never forget the moment your family breaks your heart. Mine happened at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks before Christmas. I was working late in my parents' townhouse when I heard my mother's voice through the door. "Emily's family will move in after New Year. Clara can take the basement, she won't complain. She never does." The basement. The one I'd renovated with my own $40,000. My father laughed. "That girl exists to make things easier for us. Always has." I sat there in the dark, listening to them plan my humiliation like it was a dinner menu. Their golden daughter, Emily, the one who'd made it in Manhattan, was coming home. And I, the family workhorse who'd paid their bills for years, was being buried alive. But here's what they didn't know. That $5 million villa they were living in, the one they were so proud of, it wasn't theirs. It was mine. Designed by my hands 7 years ago, left to me in a trust they'd tried to forge. So I did what any good architect does. I drew up plans. On Christmas Eve, I threw them a party. 32 guests, champagne, gold lights, the perfect family portrait. Then I played them a recording of that conversation. And I took everything. This is the story of how I went from the basement to the penthouse and left my family with nothing but the truth they'd tried to bury. Stay with me. Because what happened next, they never saw it coming. My name is Clara Dawson. I'm 38 years old and I design buildings for a living. Not the kind you see on magazine covers, but the kind that actually get built hospitals, housing complexes, the bones of other people's dreams. For the last 15 years, I'd also been the unofficial CFO of my parents' construction company, the one who made sure Dawson Builders stayed afloat while they took the credit and the corner office. That Tuesday night in December, I was doing what I always did, cleaning up their mess. It was nearly 11 o'clock, and the townhouse was quiet, except for the hum of the old radiator and the soft jazz my father always left playing in the living room. Christmas decorations crowded every surface my mother's doing. She'd gone overboard this year, filling the house with enough garland and twinkling lights to make the place look like a department store window. I'd helped her hang most of it, of course. I always did. I sat in the corner of what used to be the formal dining room, but now served as my makeshift office whenever I stayed over. My laptop glowed in the dim light spreadsheets open across the screen. The December financials for Dawson Builders were a disaster as usual. Vendors hadn't been paid in 60 days, payroll was coming up short, and my father had somehow approved 3 projects that were bleeding money before they'd even broken ground. I'd been quietly transferring funds from my own business account to cover the gaps. Again. My company, CD, Design Group, had been doing well. Really well. We'd just closed on an $800,000 contract for a riverside housing development, and I had 2 more projects in the pipeline. But instead of celebrating, I was here hunched over my parents' books, trying to figure out how to keep their sinking ship from going under. The security camera app sat open in the corner of my screen, a small window showing a grainy feed of the basement. I'd installed cameras down there 6 months ago when I'd started the renovation, $40,000 of my own money, to transform that musty, forgotten space into something livable. I'd put in new flooring insulation, a full bathroom, even a small kitchenette. I'd wanted a quiet place to work when I stayed over somewhere I could escape the chaos upstairs. The camera had been my way of monitoring the contractor's work, making sure the expensive materials I'd ordered weren't walking off the job site. I rubbed my eyes and reached for the cold coffee sitting beside me. That's when I heard their voices. My parents were in the living room just on the other side of the half-open door. I hadn't realized they were still awake. My mother's voice drifted through, first bright and animated the way it always got when she was talking about my sister. "Emily's family will move in after New Year," she said. "Clara can take the basement, she won't complain. She never does." I froze my hand, still wrapped around the coffee mug. My father's voice followed, warm with amusement. "That girl exists to make things easier for us. Always has." The mug slipped from my fingers, landing with a dull thud on the stack of papers in front of me. Coffee spread across an invoice, but I didn't move to stop it. My mother laughed. The sound was light, careless. The basement she renovated with her own money. Ironic, isn't it? Emily's been asking about it for weeks, my father continued. Says she needs more space now that Andrew's business is taking off. And honestly, we could use them here. Having a successful daughter in the house again, it'll be good for our reputation. Clara won't mind, my mother said, and I could hear the certainty in her voice. She's always been so practical. She'll understand family comes first. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The Christmas tree lights blinked in my peripheral vision, red and green and gold, cheerful and oblivious. Emily. Of course it was Emily. My younger sister, the golden child, the one who'd moved to Manhattan 8 years ago and built what my parents loved to call a real life. Emily, who sent them a card every birthday with a generic message and maybe a photo of her and her husband Andrew at some charity gala. Emily, who called once a month and always managed to mention how busy and important and successful she was. Emily, who hadn't been home for Christmas in 3 years. And I was the one who'd been here. Every week. Balancing their books, paying their bills, covering their mortgage when times got tight. I was the one who'd co-signed the loan for my mother's medical procedures last year. I was the one who'd given up my own apartment downtown because it would be easier if I stayed close by to help with the business. I'd even co-signed Emily's student loans when she'd wanted to study abroad, the loans she'd never mentioned paying back the ones I'd quietly handled when the notices started coming to my address. The basement. The space I'd built with my own hands and money, the only corner of this house that had ever truly felt like mine. And they were giving it away like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I looked down at my laptop screen. The security camera feed showed the basement in night vision green, empty and waiting. On the other monitor, the Dawson Builders accounts stared back at me. My transfers, my money, my endless invisible work. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily, the first one in 2 months. Can't wait for Christmas. Mom says you're planning something special at the villa. I stared at that message. The villa. The $5 million villa on Riverside Drive that my parents had been living in for the past 5 years. The one they loved to show off to their friends and business partners. Emily didn't even know it wasn't really theirs. But I did. I closed my laptop carefully, quietly. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I thought they would be. Through the door, I could hear my parents still talking, planning, laughing about how easy it would be to move me downstairs. How I'd never make a fuss. How I'd always been the dependable one, the invisible one, the one who could be counted on to disappear when someone more important needed the space. They were right about one thing. I wouldn't make a fuss. I stood up, gathered my papers, and tucked my laptop under my arm. The Christmas lights blinked their cheerful pattern, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed 11. They wanted the golden girl upstairs. Fine. I'd take the world below and everything that came with it. Because what my parents didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask or notice or care about, was that I'd been building something of my own this whole time. Not just a business or a bank account or a renovated basement. I'd been building a foundation. And foundations, when you do them right, are the strongest part of any structure. Strong enough to hold up a house. Strong enough to bring one down. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room upstairs, the room I'd been using for years, the one with the slanted ceiling and the window that overlooked the neighbor's brick wall, and stared at the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's laugh, that careless, dismissive sound that said I was a problem with an easy solution. By the time morning light crept through the curtains, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I'd wait. I'd watch. And I'd let them show me exactly who they were when they thought no one was paying attention. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the commotion at the front door. "Oh, sweetheart. You're here. You're finally here." My mother's voice carried through the entire house, high and bright, with a joy I hadn't heard in months, maybe years. I listened to the rustle of coats, the shuffle of expensive luggage being set down, the sound of kisses and exclamations. Our pride and joy. My mother said loud enough that I knew she wanted me to hear. Come in, let me look at you. I poured my coffee slowly, watching the dark liquid fill the mug. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see into the foyer. My mother had Emily wrapped in an embrace that looked like something from a movie, tight, emotional, full of meaning. My father stood beside them, beaming, one hand already reaching for Emily's designer luggage. Emily looked exactly like her Instagram photos. Blonde hair in perfect waves, wearing a cream cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment back when I'd had my own place. Her makeup was flawless, the kind that's meant to look natural but takes an hour to apply. She'd always been beautiful. Even as kids, strangers would stop my mother on the street to comment on Emily's looks. No one ever stopped to comment on mine. Behind Emily stood her husband, Andrew Cole. I'd only met him twice before, once at their wedding 4 years ago, and once at a charity event Emily had invited my parents to but somehow forgotten to mention to me. He was tall, angular, wearing a suit that screamed Wall Street even on a casual Saturday morning. Everything about him was sharp. His jawline, his watch. The way his eyes swept over the townhouse's interior like he was calculating its resale value. My mother finally released Emily and turned toward the kitchen. For a brief second, her gaze landed on me standing in the doorway. Oh, Clara, you're up? Good. Can you make more coffee? Emily and Andrew have had such a long drive. Not hello, not good morning, just an assignment. Already made, I said, lifting my mug slightly. My mother had already turned back to Emily, ushering her deeper into the house. Come, let me show you what we've done with the place. We've redecorated the living room. You're going to love it. I watched them move through the townhouse like a parade, my mother narrating every detail, Emily making appropriate sounds of appreciation. My father followed with the luggage, and Andrew trailed behind, his hands in his pockets, his expression politely bored. Still so quaint, Emily said as they passed through the dining room where I'd been working just hours before. She ran her hand along the back of a chair, her fingers trailing over the wood. Manhattan really changes your perspective. Everything here feels so compact. Andrew made a sound of agreement. Nice place. Cozy. The word landed like an insult. I'd heard that tone before in meetings with clients who thought they were better than the buildings they hired me to design. Cozy meant small. It meant inadequate. It meant beneath notice. I stayed in the kitchen listening to them tour the house I'd been living in, paying for holding together. I heard my mother point out the new curtains, the ones I'd helped her hang. The refinished floors, the ones I'd paid half the cost for when my father's budget came up short. The fresh paint in the hallway, the color I'd spent 2 weekends applying myself while my parents visited Emily in the city. Emily praised everything with the enthusiasm of someone who knew exactly what was expected of her. I was refilling my coffee when Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway alone. The rest of the family had moved upstairs, my mother's voice echoing down as she showed them the bedrooms. Emily stopped when she saw me, and for just a moment something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. Hey, she said, her voice softer than it had been in the foyer. I didn't get to say hi properly. Hi, I said. She moved into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile floor I'd scrubbed 2 days ago. She looked around, taking in the outdated appliances, the chipped countertops, the cheerful clutter of a house that had been lived in for 30 years. Still fixing things, sis. She gestured vaguely at the coffee maker, at me, at everything. Guess we all have our roles. The words hung between us. She said them lightly like a joke, but there was something underneath. Something I couldn't quite name. I set my mug down carefully. Someone has to. Emily's hand moved to the counter, and I noticed it trembling slightly before she gripped the edge. She looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the glossy magazine version of my sister slipped just a fraction. You're good at it, she said quietly. The words came out almost sad, like she was apologizing for something she couldn't name. Or wouldn't. Before I could respond, Andrew's voice carried down from upstairs. "Em, you coming? Your mom wants to show us the master suite." The moment broke. Emily's smile snapped back into place, bright and empty. "Coming." She turned back to me, and whatever I'd seen in her eyes was gone. "We should catch up later. I want to hear all about your work." She didn't, of course. She never did. But I nodded anyway. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. "Andrew's looking at investment properties in the area. He's really into flipping houses right now. He thinks there's good money in it." She said it casually like it was small talk, but I heard the subtext. They weren't just visiting, they were shopping. "I'm sure there is," I said. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen listening to the sounds of my family moving through the house above me. My mother's delighted chatter, my father's booming laugh at something Andrew said, Emily's musical responses perfectly timed, perfectly pitched. I thought about what I'd seen in my sister's face, that flicker of something real beneath the performance, the trembling hand, the sad edge to her voice when she'd said I was good at fixing things. For her, everything looked smaller when she came back here. The house, the furniture, the life my parents still lived, including me. But something in her eyes wasn't triumph. It wasn't the satisfaction of the favored child returning home to claim what was hers. It was something else, something hollow. And I realized, standing there in that kitchen with my cold coffee and my racing thoughts, that I didn't understand my sister at all. I'd spent years resenting her, envying her, watching her float through life on a cloud of my parents' approval. But I'd never once asked myself if she was happy, or if being the golden child was its own kind of cage. By late afternoon, my mother had made the decision official. She found me in the upstairs hallway, her arms full of fresh linens that smelled like lavender. "Clara, honey, I need you to start moving your things down to the basement. Emily and Andrew will need this room, and we want them to be comfortable." She said it the way she'd say anything else. "Pass the salt. It's supposed to rain tomorrow. Dismantle your life and move underground." "When?" I asked. "Tonight would be best. Emily wants to start settling in." She smiled, already walking away. "You understand." I did understand. That was the problem. I spent the next 2 hours carrying boxes down the narrow basement stairs. My clothes, my books, my laptop bag, the framed photo of my grandfather that had sat on my nightstand for 10 years. Each trip down felt like descending into something I couldn't quite name. The basement was nice enough, I'd made sure of that when I renovated it 2 years ago. $40,000 of my own money had transformed the damp, forgotten space into something livable. New flooring, proper insulation, a bathroom with heated tiles, even a small kitchenette tucked into the corner. I'd designed it myself, of course. Every detail. The exposed brick wall, I'd carefully restored the industrial light fixtures, the built-in shelving. It was supposed to be my studio space, my retreat when I needed to work in peace. Now it was being rebranded as my consolation prize. Upstairs I could hear them. Christmas carols playing on the old stereo system. My mother's delighted laughter, my father's booming voice telling some story Andrew was pretending to find fascinating. And Emily, her voice rose above all of them, bright and musical, leading a chorus of "Deck the Halls," like she was performing on a stage. I set down the last box in the corner of the basement near where my grandfather's belongings had been stored for years. My parents had shoved them down here after he died, promising to sort through everything eventually. They never had. Dust covered the old cardboard boxes, and I could see the edges of books poking out, their spines cracked with age. I knelt down and pulled one out. Architecture of the Modern Age, published in 1968. My grandfather's name was written inside the cover in his careful, slanted handwriting. Robert Thomas Dawson. Below it, a note, "For the builders who dream." I pulled out another. "The Art of Structure." Then another. "Principles of Design." There were at least a dozen, maybe more, all filled with his annotations in the margins. Sketches on scraps of paper tucked between pages. and in the corner rolled blueprints tied with string that had gone brittle with time. My grandfather had been the one who taught me to love buildings. When I was 7, he'd helped me build a birdhouse in his garage, explaining how every piece had to work together, how you built from the foundation up, how nothing could stand without something solid beneath it. He'd died 5 years ago, and I still missed him with an ache that lived in my chest. I sat down on the floor, my back against the restored brick wall, and opened my laptop. The basement felt too quiet compared to the noise above. I could hear footsteps, the scrape of furniture being moved. They were already rearranging my room. My screen came to life, and my company logo appeared. CD Design Group. Simple professional mine. I'd built it from nothing, client by client, design by design, until it was something real. Something that couldn't be taken away. An email notification popped up in the corner of the screen, and my breath caught. Riverside Housing Project. Final payment approved, $847,000. I stared at those numbers. $847,000. The biggest contract I'd ever landed, months of work, a design I was genuinely proud of. It was real money. The kind of money that should have made me feel successful, accomplished, secure. Instead, I was sitting on a basement floor listening to my family celebrate my displacement. I closed the email and leaned my head back against the wall. The brick was cool against my scalp, the texture rough and familiar under my palm. I traced the pattern without thinking, my fingers following the industrial modern technique I'd insisted on when the contractor wanted to smooth everything over. These walls, this texture, something nagged at me. I pulled my hand away and looked at the exposed brick. Really looked at it. The specific pattern, the way the mortar was applied, the irregular spacing that looked random but was actually carefully calculated. I'd seen this before, not just here, somewhere else. A flash of memory sitting across from a client 3 years ago, maybe 4, showing them sketches talking through the concept. Industrial modern, I'd said, pointing to my rendering. Exposed brick with this specific pattern. It's warm but contemporary. Honest materials, nothing hidden. The client had loved it. I shook my head. Coincidence. I used exposed brick in a lot of projects. It was my signature style, had been for years. Of course it would feel familiar. I'd designed this basement. Of course it reminded me of my own work. Above me, someone turned up the music. Emily's laugh rang out clear as a bell. My mother's voice joined in, calling for my father to come to see something. I sat there in the space they'd relegated me to, surrounded by my grandfather's abandoned books and my own carefully chosen design elements, with an $800,000 contract on my screen and nowhere to call home. They buried me under their house. They wanted me underground, out of sight, the family ghost who handled the bills and asked for nothing. But what they'd forgotten, what they'd never bothered to notice, was that I hadn't been idle all these years. While they'd been taking credit and collecting praise, I'd been building. Brick by brick, contract by contract, design by design. They thought they'd buried me. They didn't realize I'd built my own empire while they counted the credit. And empires, once established, don't fall easily. I stayed in the basement that night, my laptop still open, the glow from the screen casting shadows on the brick walls. The sounds from upstairs had finally quieted. Emily and Andrew had settled into my former room, and my parents had retreated to their suite. The house creaked and sighed the way old houses do, adjusting to the weight of new occupants. I pulled up my personal finance folder, the one I kept separate from my business accounts. It was something I did on the first of every month, a ritual of reconciliation that had become almost meditative over the years. Except tonight, looking at the spreadsheet felt different. Every line item felt like evidence. Parents' health insurance, $1,400 a month. Under my name because their credit had been destroyed 3 years ago, after a series of failed investment ventures my father had refused to discuss. The insurance company wouldn't touch them, but they'd accept me as the policyholder if I guaranteed payment. Mortgage supplement, $2,800 a month. The townhouse had been remortgaged twice, and the current payment was more than my parents could cover on the erratic income from Dawson Builders. I'd been quietly making up the difference for 18 months ever since my father had come to me with that particular blend of shame and expectation that made saying no impossible. Utilities $600 a month, give or take. Gas, electric, water, internet. All in my name, all automatically drafted from my account. $4,800 a month, $57,600 a year, and that didn't count the one-time emergencies. The new roof last spring, the property tax shortfall, the contractor payments that came due before clients paid my father. I sat there adding it up, watching the numbers climb, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. The basement suddenly felt smaller. I clicked over to my business account CD Design Group and scrolled through the transaction history. That's when the memories started coming sharp and clear, like photographs I'd filed away without really looking at them. 2019. I was sitting in my father's office at Dawson Builders, still optimistic that involving me more directly in the business might actually change something. He'd pushed a stack of papers across his desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Just a formality, Clara. These forms show you're authorized to help with projects. Makes it easier when you're liaising with contractors. I'd skimmed them. Authorization agreements, corporate documents, language about project management and client relations. It seemed reasonable. I signed where he pointed my signature, looping across line after line. Good girl, he'd said, and I'd felt pleased. Useful. 2 years later, 2021, he'd called me into that same office with a different energy. Excited. I've got a new client for you. Riverside Consulting, LLC. They're looking for an architect for several projects. Good steady work, Clara. I recommended you. He'd introduced me to Mr. Richardson the following week, a pleasant man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive watch. We'd met at a coffee shop downtown, discussed my portfolio, my rates, my availability. He'd been impressed, he said. Professional. He wanted to bring me on for a series of commercial projects. It had felt legitimate. It had felt like my father was finally helping me build my own career instead of just asking me to prop up his. I'd done the work. A small office renovation first, then a medical plaza, then the stadium renovation that had taken 8 months and every ounce of my creativity. Beautiful projects, work I was proud of. But in 2022, when I'd tried to discuss payment for the stadium project, something had shifted. I'd found my father in the kitchen of the townhouse making his morning coffee. Dad, I need to talk to you about the stadium design. Riverside hasn't sent the final payment yet, and it's been 60 days since completion. He'd waved his hand dismissively. Family doesn't charge family, Clara. I'd felt my face get hot. But I'm not charging you. I'm charging the client. Riverside is handling the contract. Don't worry about money. You know I'd never let you go unpaid. But the invoice... Clara. He'd turned to face me, then his expression somewhere between patience and disappointment. You're being taken care of. Some things are more important than squeezing every dollar out of every job. Riverside knows what you're worth. Trust me. And I had. Because he was my father, and because questioning him felt like betraying some unspoken code about family and loyalty and gratitude. I'd let it go. Now sitting in the basement with my laptop screen illuminating the pattern of payments from Riverside Consulting LLC, I saw it clearly. $800,000 over 5 years. Payments that came regularly, professionally, always with proper invoicing on their end. It had seemed fair, good money for good work. But something gnawed at me. I pulled up the projects I'd done for them. 12 in total. Commercial spaces renovations, new builds. I started calculating what I would have charged if they'd been independent clients using my standard rate structure. The number that emerged made my hands stop moving on the keyboard. $4 million. Market rate for the work I'd done should have been close to $4 million. I'd been paid $800,000. Riverside had been paying me. That was true, but had they been paying me fairly? And why had my father been so insistent that I not ask questions, not push for standard industry rates, not treat Riverside like any other client? The cold feeling in my stomach spread to my chest. I thought about all those authorization forms I'd signed in 2019, the corporate documents I'd skimmed. I pulled up my saved files, searching for the copies I'd kept, and started reading them carefully for the first time. My name appeared more often than I'd remembered. Not just as an authorized representative, as an officer, as a stakeholder in something called Riverside Consulting LLC. I clicked back to my email, searching for every communication with Mr. Richardson. Reading them now with different eyes, I noticed things. The way he always deferred to my father on timing, the way contracts were structured, the language that seemed to loop back on itself. I'd been proud of that steady work, grateful for my father's referral, guilty even for thinking I deserved more when I was already being paid regularly while helping hold the family business together. That guilt sat in my throat now, bitter and familiar. This was the pattern, wasn't it? Do the work, accept what's offered, feel ungrateful for wanting more, stay quiet, stay useful, stay small. I thought about Emily upstairs in my room, Emily, who'd needed so many things over the years. The study abroad program she'd wanted so badly when she was 22. My mother crying because they couldn't afford it, couldn't qualify for the loans. I'd been 28 then, just establishing my business, but my credit was good, solid. I'd co-signed the loan papers so my mother could get approved. $50,000 for a year in Paris. Emily had sent postcards. Beautiful shots of the Eiffel Tower cafes in Montmartre, her smiling in front of museums. She'd taken the window seat on that flight to Paris. I'd taken the debt. She'd never mentioned paying it back. And I'd never asked, because family doesn't charge family. My mother announced the dinner party 3 days later, her voice bright with the particular enthusiasm she reserved for events that would make the family look good. She'd invited the Hendersons from across the street, the Patels who ran the successful dental practice downtown, and the Carters whose daughter had just made partner at a law firm. 8 people total, including our family. A proper dinner party, she said. A celebration of Emily's homecoming. She asked me to prepare everything. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen roasting vegetables and searing beef tenderloin, making the mushroom risotto my mother loved to claim as her own recipe. I set the table with the good china, the pieces my grandmother had left us, and arranged the centerpiece with winter greenery and white candles. The dining room looked elegant, warm, exactly the kind of scene that would photograph well. By the time the guests arrived, I'd changed into a simple black dress and pulled my hair back. My mother greeted everyone at the door in an emerald silk blouse, looking radiant. My father wore his best suit. Emily descended the stairs like she was making an entrance, Andrew beside her in charcoal gray that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I served the first course and took my seat at the far end of the table, the spot closest to the kitchen, so I could get up easily when something was needed. The conversation found its rhythm quickly. The Patels asked about Emily's life in Manhattan, and she launched into stories about her apartment in Tribble, the gallery openings she attended, the restaurant where you needed reservations 3 months in advance. Andrew added details about his investment firm, dropping names of clients that made Mr. Henderson raise his eyebrows appreciatively. My mother glowed. She kept touching Emily's hand, beaming at the guests like she was presenting evidence of her excellent parenting. "We're just so proud," she said, her voice warm. "Emily's been such a help to us financially. Honestly, we'd be lost without her." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down carefully, the small clink of metal on china audible only to me. Emily had sent them $5,000 once 2 years ago. A birthday check for my mother that had come with a card about supporting the people who raised me right. My mother had framed the card. I sent them $4,200 every month. Had been for nearly 2 years. I looked up and found Mrs. Carter smiling at Emily. "That's wonderful. It's so rare to see young people who remember to take care of their parents." Emily smiled graciously, accepting the compliment like it was her due. Andrew leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. He had the satisfied look of someone who'd closed a good deal. "You know what I tell my team. Success is a mindset. You either have that drive, that hunger to excel, or you don't." He paused, his eyes moving around the table, landing on me. "Not everyone's built for the big leagues. Some people are more support staff. Nothing wrong with that. The world needs support staff." The table went quiet for a beat. I felt everyone's attention shift, felt them not looking at me while being acutely aware of exactly where I sat. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down. When I spoke, my voice was calm, almost conversational. "No, you're right. Some of us build the stadium, others just buy tickets." The silence that followed was different, sharper. Andrew's expression flickered, something between confusion and irritation crossing his face. Mr. Henderson made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Mrs. Patel looked down at her plate, but I caught the slight smile at the corner of her mouth. My father cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the quiet. Then he laughed, hearty and dismissive, the laugh that said nothing important had happened. "Clara's always been so practical, so literal-minded. Andrew, you were saying about the market trends." And just like that, the conversation moved on. Andrew started talking about cryptocurrency, my father nodding along like he understood the guests asking polite questions. The moment dissolved like it had never happened. But I caught Emily's reaction. She was looking at me, her face pale, her lips parted like she was about to say something. I watched her gather breath, watched her lean forward slightly. Then she stopped. Her mouth closed. She looked down at her plate at the risotto I'd spent an hour stirring and didn't say whatever she'd been about to say. The dinner continued. My mother brought out the dessert I'd made, accepting compliments on the chocolate torte like she'd baked it herself. Emily and Andrew told more stories. The guests laughed in the right places. My father poured more wine. I excused myself to make coffee standing in the kitchen while the espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Through the doorway I could see them all framed in the warm light of the dining room. The perfect tableau of a successful family. Emily gesturing with her hands as she described some Manhattan adventure. My mother's adoring expression. Andrew's confident posture. My father's booming laugh. They looked happy, complete, like a photograph that didn't need anything else in it. I poured the coffee into my grandmother's delicate cups and brought them out on a silver tray, playing my role with the same precision I brought to my architecture work. Functional, invisible, necessary but unremarked upon. The party wound down around 10. The guests left with warm goodbyes and thank yous directed at my mother. Emily hugged Mrs. Carter and promised to have lunch soon. Andrew shook hands with Mr. Henderson, already talking about a golf game. I started clearing plates while they said their final farewells at the door. That dinner ended with champagne and laughter, with my mother's delighted voice carrying through the house as she recounted Emily's stories to my father. It ended with Andrew's arm around my sister, with promises of more gatherings with the satisfied glow of people who believed their own performance. Mine ended differently. Mine ended with my hands in dishwater, watching the foam dissolve grease from my grandmother's china, counting in my head. The mortgage supplement, the insurance, the utilities, the loan I'd co-signed, the work I'd done for a fraction of its value, the dinner I'd cooked, the room I'd lost, the casual cruelty of being erased while still standing in it. Mine ended with a decision. Christmas was 3 weeks away. My mother was already planning another gathering, something bigger, she'd said. A proper celebration at the villa. Perfect timing. I threw myself into work the following week. My design studio became a refuge, the one space that was entirely mine. It was a modest office in a converted warehouse downtown, just 2 rooms with tall windows and good light, but I'd built it into something real. 3 employees, now all talented designers I'd mentored. A steady stream of clients. A reputation that had nothing to do with my family name. I was reviewing blueprints for a community center project when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Ms. Dawson. The voice was professional measured. This is Robert Chen. I'm calling regarding your grandfather's estate. I set down my pencil. I'm sorry, who? Robert Chen. I was your grandfather's attorney. I'm calling regarding some unfinished matters in his estate. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Mr. Chen, my grandfather passed away 5 years ago. Yes, in April of 2019. I'm aware. A pause. These matters are time-sensitive, Ms. Dawson. Would you be able to meet with me this week, preferably before your birthday? My birthday. I felt off balance, like I'd walked into a conversation already in progress. How do you know when my birthday is? It's relevant to the estate. Are you available tomorrow, say 2 o'clock? I looked at my calendar at the appointments I'd scheduled, the site visits planned. I can be. He gave me an address in the financial district, thanked me politely, and hung up before I could ask any of the dozen questions suddenly crowding my mind. The building was old money wrapped in new renovation. Marble floors, brass fixtures that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, the kind of quiet that only expensive spaces achieve. Chen's office was on the 12th floor behind a heavy wooden door with his name in discreet gold lettering. He rose when his assistant showed me in. Late 60s, I guessed, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a 3-piece suit that had probably been tailored before I was born. Everything about him spoke of old New York, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Ms. Dawson, thank you for coming. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. I imagine you're curious about this meeting. That's one word for it. He smiled just slightly and pulled a file from his desk drawer. The tab read, Thomas Dawson, Irrevocable Trust, 2019. Your grandfather established this trust in March of 2019, approximately 1 month before his death. I served as his attorney for 30 years, and I've been serving as trustee since the trust activated. He opened the file, and I saw documents, official seals, my grandfather's signature on pages dated 5 years ago. It felt surreal seeing his handwriting again. That careful architectural precision he'd brought to everything, even signing his name. The trust has one primary beneficiary, Chen continued. You, Clara Marie Dawson. I stared at him. I don't understand. There was a will. It went through probate. I remember my parents handling everything. The will addressed personal effects, some minor financial accounts, but your grandfather's significant assets were placed in this trust, which is a separate legal instrument. Trusts don't go through probate. They're private. He slid a document across the desk. The primary asset is a property located at 47 Riverside Drive, a villa approximately 6,000 square feet purchased in 2019. Current valuation is $5.2 million. The numbers swam in front of my eyes. 5.2 million, Riverside Drive. Mr. Chen, my voice came out steady, which surprised me. My parents live on Riverside Drive. Yes. In a villa. Yes. The room felt smaller. Are you telling me the property your parents currently reside in is the asset held in trust for you? It has been since your grandfather's death. I couldn't breathe properly. My parents had moved into that villa 5 years ago, right after my grandfather died. My mother had talked about it for months, about how they'd finally found their dream home, how my father had closed the deal, how it represented everything they'd worked for. They don't know. It wasn't a question. The trust was established privately. Your parents were permitted to reside in the property under specific terms, which I'll explain shortly. But no, they were not informed that beneficial ownership rested with you. Chen pulled out another document. Additionally, the trust holds 51% of shares in Dawson Builders. These are currently structured as Class B non-voting shares. My head spun. I signed some corporate documents a few years ago. My father said they were authorization forms. Those documents likely made you a shareholder. Your grandfather ensured those shares were placed in trust for you. Chen's expression remained neutral professional, but something in his eyes suggested he understood exactly what my father had done. Why? The question came out raw. Why would he do this and not tell me? Your grandfather was very specific about the timing. The trust terms include certain trigger dates and conditions. He glanced at another page. You turn 38 next week, is that correct? Yes, December 25th. That date is mentioned specifically in the trust documents. There are actions I'm authorized to take once you reach that age, provided certain other conditions are met. What conditions? That will require a longer conversation. Chen closed the file, but his hand rested on it. Ms. Dawson, your grandfather was a careful man. He built things to last. This trust was built with the same precision. I thought about my grandfather's books in the basement, his notes about foundations and structures, about building from the ground up. The villa, I said slowly. My parents have been living there for 5 years. Yes. And I stopped. I'd been paying their bills, supplementing their mortgage. Except if they'd been living in a property held in trust for me, what mortgage had I been paying? Chen watched me process this, his expression carefully neutral. My grandfather died 5 years ago, I said. My parents moved into that villa 5 years ago, and I've been paying their bills ever since. Yes. That's not a coincidence. No, Ms. Dawson, it's not. Chen's expression said he'd been waiting 5 years for me to sit in this chair, ask these questions, start putting the pieces together. He'd been waiting for me to reach the age my grandfather had designated to trigger whatever mechanism had been carefully constructed in legal language and trust documents. What happens now? I asked. Chen smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Now we discuss the terms, and what you'd like to do about them. Chen reached back into the file and pulled out another document, this one clipped to a yellow legal pad covered in his own handwriting. He set it in front of me with the deliberate care of someone presenting evidence. Before we discuss the terms your grandfather established, there's something you need to see. The document was labeled Codicil to the Thomas Dawson Irrevocable Trust. It was dated January 2020, 9 months after my grandfather's death. I scanned the legal language, the formal declarations, until I reached the critical paragraph. The grantor, being of sound mind, hereby amends the previous designation and bequeaths the property located at 47 Riverside Drive to his son William Robert Dawson in recognition of his continued stewardship of the family business and his role as primary caregiver during the grantor's final months. My grandfather's signature sat at the bottom of the page, witnessed and notarized. I don't understand, I said. He changed his mind. Look at the signature. I pulled the document closer, studying the familiar loops and angles of my grandfather's handwriting. It looked right. The careful capital T, the way the D in Dawson connected to the A, the small flourish at the end. I'd seen that signature 1,000 times growing up. It looks like his. Does it? Chen slid the original trust document beside the codicil. Compare them. I looked at both signatures side by side. They were nearly identical, almost perfect mirrors of each other. And that's when I saw it. This isn't real. Chen's expression didn't change. Why do you say that? I pointed to the original trust signature, the one from March 2019. Here, in the D, there's a slight tremor, a wavering in the downstroke. It's subtle, but it's there. My grandfather had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's the year before he died. His hands had started to shake just barely, just enough that he'd stopped doing the detailed drafting work he loved. But his signature had still been his, just with that telltale tremor that medication could only partly control. The signature on the codicil was smooth, confident, practiced. No tremor at all. This is forged, I said, my voice flat. Correct. Chen pulled out a folder filled with what looked like expert reports, notarized statements, official seals. I never witnessed this document. Your grandfather never signed it. Someone created it, forged the signature, and filed it with the county clerk's office in February of 2020. Who? But I already knew. There was only one person who would benefit from changing the villa's ownership. Only one person who would need to erase me from my grandfather's plans. Your father filed it, Chen said quietly. I have the filing records. William Dawson, acting as executor of his father's estate, submitted this codicil as an amendment to be recorded alongside the property deed. I stared at the forged signature, at the careful replication of my grandfather's handwriting. This wasn't a spontaneous act. Someone had practiced this, studied the original, taken time to get it right. Why didn't you say something? The question came out sharper than I intended. You knew this was fake. You could have challenged it. Chen folded his hands on the desk. I wanted to. Believe me, Ms. Dawson, I've spent 5 years wanting to. But the trust terms were very specific. He pulled out a section of the original trust document highlighted in yellow. Your grandfather included explicit instructions about my role as trustee. I'll read it to you. The trustee shall not proactively disclose the existence or terms of this trust to the beneficiary until such time as the beneficiary makes inquiry regarding the grantor's estate or expresses doubt about representations made regarding the grantor's intentions. He wanted me to ask questions first. He wanted you to discover the truth yourself. I couldn't approach you until you came to me or until you reached the age trigger, whichever came first. Chen's expression softened slightly. Your father assumed I would never find out about the forged codicil. I retired from active practice in 2021, moved my office, changed my contact information. He thought the trail had gone cold. What he didn't know was that I retained my role as trustee, and trustees have a legal obligation to monitor assets under their control. I've been watching that property, waiting. For what? For you to turn 38. For you to start asking questions. For you to be ready. He reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored heavy stock. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting. He left this with me in March of 2019, a few weeks before he died. I was instructed to give it to you only after showing you the evidence of the forgery. My hands shook as I took the envelope. The seal cracked easily. The glue dried after 5 years of waiting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my grandfather's letterhead, his handwriting filling the page. Clara, if Robert is showing you this, it means you've questioned what you were told. That's the first step. Most people accept the story they're given, especially when it comes from family. But you've always been different. You've always looked at structures and seen what holds them up, what makes them strong, what makes them fail. I'm leaving you a test, granddaughter, not because I doubt you, but because I know you. You need to see the truth yourself. You need to measure it, question it, prove it before you'll believe it. Builders don't inherit. Builders create. We take raw materials and transform them into something that stands. That's what you've done your whole life, even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. But sometimes we need to reclaim what's already ours. Sometimes the foundation has always been there, waiting for us to recognize it. Claim it, build on it. The villa is yours because you designed it. I'll explain that when you're ready to see it. The company shares are yours because you've been running it without the title. Your father thinks he's clever. He's not. He's just willing to do things a man of integrity wouldn't. Don't be angry at Robert for his silence. I bound him with those terms because I needed you to arrive at this moment through your own power, your own questions, your own strength. You are a builder, Clara. Now build something worthy of that gift, with love and faith. Grandpa, I read it twice, then a third time. The paper blurred as my eyes filled, but I didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. I designed it. I looked up at Chen. What does he mean I designed the villa? That's a conversation for our next meeting. There's more to show you, but I think you've had enough revelations for one day. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope. My grandfather's words settled into my chest, heavy and solid like the foundation he'd mentioned. I thought about the forged signature, about my father's careful practice, about 5 years of lies stacked on top of each other like poorly mortared bricks. My grandfather had left me a test. My parents had left me a lie. And Christmas was 3 weeks away. Perfect timing to return both. I left Chen's office with my grandfather's letter in my purse and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop questioning yourself and start questioning everything else. My studio became a war room. I cleared the main drafting table and set up a whiteboard against the wall where we usually displayed client presentations. For 3 days, I filled it with timelines, names, documents, dates. Everything I knew, everything I'd discovered, everything I needed to verify. The trust, the forged codicil, the shell company, the villa, the shares. I drew lines connecting them, creating a map of deception that had taken my family 5 years to construct. On the 4th day, I picked up my phone and called Chen. "I need to see the villa," I said. "As beneficiary, I have that right." "Indeed." I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll arrange access. When would you like to visit? Tomorrow, alone." "I'll have the keys ready." That evening, I drove to my parents' townhouse. The Christmas decorations were even more elaborate, now my mother having added garland to the staircase and a second tree in the living room. I found her in the kitchen going through recipes with Emily. "Mom," I was thinking. I kept my voice light, helpful. "It would be nice to have a family Christmas party this year. At the villa. I could help organize it." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Emily set down her coffee cup. "You want to help?" My mother's tone was cautious, like I'd just offered something that seemed too good to be true. "It's Christmas. We should celebrate together." I smiled. "Emily's home, Andrew's business is going well. It would be nice to have everyone together in a beautiful space." Emily leaned forward. "Actually, Andrew was just saying he'd love to host something for his business partners. Show them the villa, do some networking." "Perfect. Better than I'd planned." "Well," my mother said slowly, already warming to the idea, "I suppose it would be lovely. The villa does photograph beautifully, and it has been a while since we've entertained properly." "I'll handle everything," I said. "The planning, the caterer, all of it. You and Dad have been so busy with the business. Let me take this off your plate." My mother's face transformed. This was the daughter she understood, the one who made things easier. "That's very thoughtful, Clara. Very thoughtful indeed." "What date were you thinking?" Emily asked. I pretended to consider. "December 24th, Christmas Eve feels right. Festive." "Perfect," my mother said. "I'll tell your father. He'll be so pleased that you're finally taking an interest in family gatherings." I drove back to my studio with my hands steady on the wheel, my mother's words echoing in my head. Finally taking an interest. As if I hadn't been holding their lives together for years. The next 2 weeks disappeared into planning. I created an invitation list with surgical precision. 32 names. My parents' business partners, yes, but also architects from the firm that had supposedly designed the villa. Industry colleagues who would recognize certain design elements. A journalist from Real Estate Weekly who owed me a favor. The Patels, the Hendersons, the Carter's people who'd witnessed that dinner party, who'd heard Andrew's casual cruelty. I designed the invitation myself. Cream cardstock, elegant gold foil lettering. "The Dawson family presents a Christmas reunion, celebrating legacy, family, and truth." I had them printed at the same shop that did my business cards expedited. I booked a caterer who specialized in high-end events, a photographer whose work appeared in architectural magazines, and an AV equipment company telling them I needed a presentation system capable of displaying documents clearly to a room of 30-plus people. The owner had asked what kind of documents. "Legal," I'd said. "Very important legal documents." On December 15th, I called Chen from my office door closed, lights dimmed. "I need you present on December 24th, 7 p.m., at the villa. Bring all the documentation. I see. A pause. Are you preparing to execute the trust transfer? I'm preparing for truth. I heard him exhale a sound that might have been approval. I'll be there, with everything you'll need. Now, sitting at my desk on December 18th, I looked at the calendar I'd hung on the wall. 3 dates circled in red. December 24th. The party. Christmas Eve. The stage where everything would be revealed under perfect lighting, witnessed by people who mattered, documented by professionals. December 25th. My 38th birthday. The trigger date my grandfather had written into the trust. The moment when certain provisions activated, when certain rights became irrevocable. December 26th. The day after, when the trust would fully execute according to its terms, when the legal mechanisms my grandfather had built would complete their work. 3 days, 72 hours, the distance between the life I'd been living and the life I was going to reclaim. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Guest list looks wonderful. So excited you've really outdone yourself this time. I set the phone face down on my desk. They wanted a perfect family portrait for Christmas. The kind of scene that looked beautiful in photographs that told a story of success and togetherness and American dream achieved. My mother would wear her best dress. My father would pour expensive wine. Emily would glow in the spotlight. Andrew would network and charm and make everyone believe they were witnessing something special. I'd give them that portrait. But I'd also give them something else. Every crack in the foundation exposed. Every lie brought into the light. Every stolen brick accounted for and returned to its rightful place. Not revenge, restoration. Because that's what builders do. We don't destroy. We reveal what's already there beneath the surface, strip away what's false, and rebuild on what's true. My grandfather had taught me that. And on Christmas Eve in the villa he'd left me in front of everyone who needed to see it, I'd show them exactly what I'd learned. Chen met me at his office on December 19th, the keys to the villa in a small manila envelope that felt heavier than it should. Your parents are attending a contractor meeting in Albany this afternoon, he said. They won't be back until evening. You'll have the space to yourself. I took the envelope feeling the weight of brass and possibility. Thank you. Ms. Dawson. He paused as I turned to leave. Whatever you discover in that house, remember that your grandfather's intentions were deliberate. Every detail mattered to him. I drove to Riverside Drive with the envelope on the passenger seat, my heart beating faster than the situation warranted. It was just a house, just a property, just an asset in a trust that happened to bear my name. Except it wasn't. The villa sat back from the street, partially hidden by mature trees that had probably been there for decades. The driveway curved in a gentle arc, and as I rounded it, the house came into full view. It was beautiful, modern without being cold, substantial without being ostentatious. Clean lines and natural materials, large windows that seemed to frame the river view like living artwork. The kind of design that looked effortless but required hundreds of hours of careful thought. I'd seen photographs, of course. My mother had shown me pictures when they'd first moved in, her voice bright with pride about their new home. But standing here seeing it in person, something shifted in my chest. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching on the exposed brick wall that dominated the left side of the entryway. The bricks were arranged in an irregular pattern, industrial, but warm, the mortar deliberately textured. I stopped walking. My hand reached out almost involuntarily and touched the wall. The texture under my palm was familiar. Not just familiar. Identical. I thought about the basement in my parents' townhouse, about tracing this exact pattern in the dark while my family celebrated upstairs. I'd dismissed it as coincidence then, as my own style echoing back at me. But this wasn't an echo. I moved through the house slowly, my architect's eye cataloging details. The open-plan living area with its vaulted ceiling, the kitchen with custom storage solutions built into unexpected spaces, The way the rooms flowed into each other, creating sightlines that made the space feel larger than its footprint. When I reached the master bedroom, I stopped in the doorway. The windows. 3 of them asymmetric, set at specific angles to capture morning light while maintaining privacy from the neighboring properties. I'd used that exact configuration once before, years ago, solving a difficult site constraint for a client who'd wanted light without exposure. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I opened my cloud storage, scrolling back through project folders. 2018. 2017. Further back. There. Project Riverside, 2017. I opened the file, my breath catching as the renderings loaded. The master bedroom on my screen matched the room I was standing in. Not similar. Not inspired by. Matched. The window angles, the ceiling height. The built-in bench beneath the center window, even the specific placement of the overhead light fixture. I walked back to the foyer, my phone in one hand, old design files in the other. The brick pattern. Mine. The skylight over the stairwell with its geometric pattern that created specific shadow effects at noon. Mine. I found the hidden storage under the main staircase, a panel that looked like wall until you knew where to press. My innovation? My solution to a client who'd wanted concealment without obviousness. Every detail, every choice, every signature element of my design philosophy. This villa wasn't just similar to Project Riverside, it was Project Riverside built exactly as I'd drawn it 7 years ago. I sat down on the floor of the foyer, my back against my own brick wall, and tried to remember. 2017. I'd been 31, hungry to prove myself, taking any client who would give me a chance. The call had come through a referral, someone who knew someone. An anonymous client, they'd said. Very private. Wanted a villa designed for a specific Riverside Drive lot. Client R, they'd called him in the paperwork. I'd been thrilled. It was the biggest project I'd been offered, a chance to design something substantial, something that would matter. I'd poured everything into those drawings, stayed up for weeks perfecting every angle, every detail, every solution to the site's challenges. Then, 3 months into the design development phase, I'd gotten the call. The project was canceled. Client R had changed his mind, decided not to build. They'd paid me a kill fee, $15,000 for my work to date, and that was that. I'd been devastated. But you moved on. That was the business. Not every project got built. You took the payment, learned from the experience, and found the next client. I'd never thought about Project Riverside again. The design had lived in my archive files, a beautiful corpse of what might have been. Except it hadn't died. Someone had built it. Every detail I'd designed, every innovation I'd developed. And they'd done it without my knowledge, without my credit, without my consent. I opened my phone's browser with trembling fingers and searched for the property records. 47 Riverside Drive. Purchased April 2019 by RT Holdings LLC. Renovated May through November 2019 by Meridian Architecture Firm. Meridian. I knew that firm. Mid-tier, competent but not exceptional. I'd competed against them for projects before. I searched for their website, found their portfolio section, clicked through their completed projects. And there it was. My villa. My design. My brick pattern, my windows, my skylight. Listed under Meridian Architecture, Riverside Estate, 2019. The description praised their innovative approach to modern luxury and their signature integration of industrial elements with natural light. My signature. My elements. My work. I sat there on the floor of a house I'd designed 7 years ago for a client I'd never met, a house that had been built without my knowledge and claimed by someone else, a house my parents had been living in while I paid their bills from a basement I'd built with my own hands. The pieces were there, scattered like blueprints across a table, but they didn't quite form a complete picture yet. RT Holdings. Client R. My grandfather's trust. The timing. My grandfather had died in April 2019. This property had been purchased in April 2019. The renovation had been completed by November. My parents had moved in by December, right around the time my father had introduced me to Riverside Consulting LLC, right around the time he'd started having me sign those authorization forms. I didn't inherit this house. I built it. 7 years ago for a ghost I'd known only as Client R, and someone had stolen my blueprints, my vision, my signature, and constructed it without my name anywhere on the plans. The only question left was the one that made my hands shake and my breath come short. Did my grandfather know I called Chen from my car before I even left the villa's driveway? My voice shaking so badly I had to repeat myself twice. The villa. It's my design. From 2017. Every detail. Every window, every brick, every innovation. It's mine. There was a pause, then Chen's voice calm and unsurprised. Come to my office, now. The drive back to the financial district felt like it took hours instead of 40 minutes. I kept seeing the villa in my mind overlaid with my original renderings, the two images identical down to the smallest detail. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Chen was waiting when I arrived, his office door already open. He gestured me to the same leather chair I'd sat in before, but this time he had a different file on his desk. The tab read CR 2017 in his precise handwriting. Client Riverside, I said, staring at it. That's what this is. Yes. He opened the file and I saw contracts, correspondence, project briefs. Your grandfather hired you in 2017 under the name RT Holdings LLC. RT Robert Thomas. His initials. He slid the first document across. The contract was standard, the kind I'd signed dozens of times early in my career. Architect services for residential design conceptual phase. Client name RT Holdings LLC. My signature at the bottom dated February 2017, but clipped to it was a handwritten note on my grandfather's personal stationery. I recognized his writing immediately, that careful architectural precision. Project brief, Chen said. He wrote this before hiring you. I read it slowly. Test her vision without my influence. I want to see what she creates when she doesn't know I'm watching. Let her design freely, purely without trying to please me or live up to any expectation except her own. If she's truly a builder, it will show in the bones of the structure. My throat tightened. The $15,000 kill fee. Chen continued, pulling out another document. That was from him. He paid you for your work, then filed the design away. He told you the project was canceled because he wasn't ready to build yet. He wanted to wait. Wait for what? For the right moment. For you to be ready. Chen opened another section of the file. In March of 2019, 1 month before your grandfather died, he executed this contract. The document was a design rights purchase agreement. RT Holdings LLC purchasing full rights to Project Riverside Residential Design, including all drawings, specifications, and intellectual property from CD Design Group. Purchase price $200,000. My signature was at the bottom. Clara Dawson, owner, CD Design Group, dated March 15, 2019. I never signed this, I said. I never got $200,000. Didn't you? Chen pulled out a bank statement, my business account from March 2019. He pointed to a deposit dated March 18, 2019, $200,000. The notation read, Payment, Project Fees, Stadium Renovation. I stared at it, my mind racing back. March 2019. I'd been working on a stadium renovation for months, a massive project through Riverside Consulting LLC. The project had wrapped in February, and the final payment had come through in March. A large payment. Larger than I'd expected, actually, but I'd been grateful. I'd assumed they were pleased with my work, that maybe they'd included a bonus. That wasn't stadium payment, I said slowly. No, it was payment for your villa design rights. Your grandfather bought them legally through Riverside Consulting LLC. Chen pulled out more documents, and I saw the trail now. Riverside Consulting purchasing the rights from me, then immediately transferring them to RT Holdings. A shell company buying from me and selling to my grandfather, making it look like something else entirely. My father set this up. Your grandfather asked him to. He wanted the transaction to appear routine, didn't want you questioning a large payment from an unknown source. Your father didn't know about the villa plans. He thought he was just helping his father make a quiet real estate investment. Chen pulled out the property purchase records. RT Holdings had bought the Riverside Drive lot in April 2019, weeks after my grandfather died. The trust had executed the purchase posthumously following instructions he'd left. The renovation, I said, Meridian Architecture. We're hired only to supervise permits and construction management. They didn't design anything. They were given your complete plans and told to execute them exactly. Chen's expression hardened. What they did after that, claiming the design as their own, putting it in their portfolio that wasn't part of any agreement. That was theft of intellectual property. Your grandfather's estate could have sued them, but he'd specified in his trust documents that no legal action be taken until you discovered the truth yourself. I sat back the pieces, finally forming a complete picture. My grandfather had hired me anonymously, let me design freely. Paid me fairly for the concept work. Then he'd bought the full rights to my design, paid me market rate through a shell company so I wouldn't question it, and built my vision exactly as I'd drawn it. He'd left it to me in a trust, waited for me to turn 38, waited for me to walk through those doors and recognize my own work. He was testing me, I said. Chen nodded. He wrote this the day before he died. He pulled out a final note, my grandfather's handwriting shakier than usual, the Parkinson's more evident. I wanted to see if she'd recognize her own creation, even when others claimed it. A true artist knows their work. A builder knows their bones. If she walks through that villa and sees herself in the walls, she's ready for what I'm leaving her. Not just the property, not just the shares, but the knowledge that she doesn't need anyone's permission to be who she already is. I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. He hadn't stolen my design. He'd bought it, honored it, built it exactly as I'd envisioned it. He'd even left Meridian's theft unchallenged because he wanted me to see that too, to understand how the industry worked, how credit got stolen, how builders got erased. And he'd waited to see if I'd recognize my own hands in the walls, waited to see if I knew my own work when I saw it. I'd passed his test without knowing I was taking it. The party, I said quietly. December 24th. Yes. Meridian Architecture. They're on the invitation list. Chen's smile was thin and sharp. Are they? They're going to stand in that villa and accept compliments on design work they stole from me? I looked up at him. In front of industry colleagues, in front of press, in front of everyone who matters. Your grandfather would appreciate the symmetry, Chen said. I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been in days. The villa wasn't just an inheritance, it was proof. Proof that I'd always been a builder even when no one was watching. Proof that my work could stand on its own. Proof that my grandfather had seen me when everyone else looked through me. And in 5 days, everyone else would see me too. I spent that evening at my studio finalizing the invitation design. Cream cardstock, heavyweight, the kind that felt substantial in your hand. Gold foil lettering, elegant but not ostentatious. The words mattered, so I chose them carefully. The Dawson family presents a Christmas reunion, celebrating legacy, family, and truth. The location line read simply, The Riverside Villa, 47 Riverside Drive. Truth. I'd slipped it right into the center of the invitation, and no one would notice until it was too late. The next morning, I drove to my parents' townhouse with a leather portfolio containing the design mock-up and a carefully curated guest list. I found them in the living room with Emily and Andrew, my mother already animated about party details she hadn't actually planned. Clara? She stood when I entered, her face bright. Do you have the plans? I set the portfolio on the coffee table and opened it. The invitation design was displayed on the first page, and my mother gasped with the exact delight I'd anticipated. Oh, it's beautiful. Emily, look at this. Finally, you're being helpful. Clara's organizing the party, and it's going to be spectacular. Emily leaned forward, studying the invitation. Her eyes moved over the words, lingered on truth, then flicked up to my face. You're helping. The question hung in the air, weighted with suspicion she couldn't quite articulate. I smiled, the expression warm and uncomplicated. It's Christmas. Family should be together. My father picked up the guest list I'd prepared for them, the sanitized version. Their business partners, their friends from the country club, the people they wanted to impress. Safe names, expected names. This looks good, he said, nodding. The Richardsons, the Thompsons, all people who matter. Andrew reached for the list, scanning it with the practiced eye of someone always calculating advantage. Good networking opportunities here. My partners will appreciate meeting some of these people. The Peterson group especially. I've been trying to get a meeting with them. I thought you might, I said smoothly. I made sure to include people who'd be valuable connections. My father set down the list and looked at me, his expression softer than I'd seen in months. I'm proud of you for stepping up, Clara. This is exactly the kind of family contribution I've been hoping to see from you. The words should have hurt. A week ago they would have. Now they just felt like confirmation that everything I was doing was necessary. I held his gaze, my smile still in place. I'm just following Grandpa's example. He taught me about building legacies. Something flickered in my father's expression, too quick to read. Then it was gone. Yes. Well, he'd be pleased to see this. My mother was already pulling out her phone, texting friends about the party. Emily sat back against the couch, still watching me with that careful suspicion, but she said nothing. I left them planning their outfits and their talking points, already constructing the narrative they'd tell about their successful family gathering. What I didn't tell them was that the guest list in my portfolio was incomplete. The real guest list, the one I'd already sent to the printer, included 32 names. The 15 they'd seen, plus 17 others. 3 architects from Meridian Architecture firm, including the principal who'd put my villa design in their portfolio. 4 colleagues from the architectural community who would recognize my signature style. 2 journalists, including Rebecca Walsh from Real Estate Weekly, who'd written several pieces about design attribution and intellectual property theft. The rest were industry people, professionals who understood what they were seeing when they saw it. I'd printed and mailed those invitations 3 days ago. That afternoon, I met Chen at his office. He had the trust documents spread across his desk, pages marked with colored tabs. The trust terms are clear, he said, pointing to a highlighted section. On December 26th, the day after your 38th birthday, you have full authority to assume ownership and exercise all rights as beneficiary. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap. I want it, December 24th, during the party. Chen looked up, his eyes sharp. That's 2 days before the trigger date. I know. It would require proving the violation clause, the terms your parents agreed to when they were permitted to reside in the property. He pulled out another section of the trust. Specifically that they treat you with respect and dignity as determined by the trustee. I have proof. What kind of proof? I pulled out my phone, opened the security camera app I'd installed in the townhouse basement. The footage was dated December 3rd, the conversation my parents had thought was private. I'd downloaded it, backed it up in 3 separate locations. Chen watched the clip, his expression never changing. When it finished, he looked at me. This is admissible. It demonstrates clear violation of the trust terms. I want to present it at the party, in front of everyone. And then I want you to execute the ownership transfer immediately. You understand what you're asking. This will be very public, very permanent. That's exactly what I want. Chen studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll prepare the documents. I'll be there at 7 p.m. on the 24th with everything you need. Including the eviction notice. I drove back to my studio as the sun set over the city, the skyline turning gold and then purple. In 5 days, my parents would stand in a villa I'd designed, accepting congratulations for a life they'd built on my labor. They'd smile for photographs, toast to family, bask in the warm glow of their carefully constructed image. And I would dismantle it piece by piece in front of everyone who mattered. They were polishing their image for photos, choosing their best angles, rehearsing their humble gratitude. I was setting the stage. Every guest carefully selected. Every detail orchestrated. Every light positioned to illuminate exactly what I wanted seen and nothing else. They thought I was finally playing my role. The helpful daughter. The family workhorse. The one who made everything run smoothly. They were right. Just not the role they imagined. December 24th arrived with clear skies and temperatures just cold enough to feel like Christmas without being uncomfortable. I arrived at the villa at 2 p.m. before anyone else, and let myself in with the keys Chen had given me. The caterers arrived at 3. I'd hired the best, the kind who handled events for diplomats and CEOs, people who knew how to make wealth look effortless. They transformed the villa's main rooms with white roses and gold accents, tall candles in crystal holders, garlands of evergreen that filled the air with the scent of winter. In the living room, a string quartet set up near the windows, their instruments gleaming in the afternoon light. The champagne fountain went in the foyer right in front of my exposed brick wall, the one Meridian had claimed as their design innovation. I watched the caterers position it, thinking about how fitting it was that the first thing guests would see was my work, even if they didn't know it yet. By 6 o'clock, the villa looked like something from a magazine spread. Golden light spilled from every window. The string quartet played Mozart, the notes floating through rooms I'd designed 7 years ago. White-gloved servers stood ready with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than most people spent on dinner. I'd dressed carefully that morning. A simple black dress, elegant, but understated, the kind that wouldn't draw attention in photographs. I wanted to blend into the background tonight, at least at first. Let the spotlight stay where it always went on Emily, on my parents, on the performance of family success. The guests began arriving promptly at 6:30. I watched them come up the curved driveway, expensive cars delivering expensive people. Business suits and cocktail dresses, jewelry that caught the light, the Hendersons, the Patels, the Carters, all the familiar faces from my parents' social circle, but also the ones they didn't know I'd invited. The senior partner from Meridian Architecture, a man named Douglas Reed, who I'd seen accept an award for this villa's design. 3 colleagues from the AIA who knew my work. The real estate weekly reporter with a camera around her neck. I played hostess with the same precision I brought to architectural drawings. Greeting guests at the door, taking coats, directing them toward champagne and conversation. Most of them barely looked at me. I was staff, essentially the family member who made things run smoothly. My parents arrived at 6:45, my mother resplendent in burgundy silk, my father in a tuxedo that made him look distinguished and successful. My mother's eyes swept the villa, taking in every perfect detail, and her smile was radiant. "Oh, Clara, you've outdone yourself. This is just beautiful." She moved past me, into the living room, already finding her audience. I heard her voice rise above the quartet, warm and practiced. "Our daughter Emily, she's been instrumental in our success. We're so blessed to have both our girls here tonight." I stayed near the entrance watching Emily arrive with Andrew. She wore cream Armani, her hair styled in loose waves, looking every inch the Manhattan success story. But when her eyes found mine across the foyer, something flickered in her expression. Discomfort, maybe. Or recognition that something was off, even if she couldn't name what. She kept looking at me throughout the next hour, catching my eye while Andrew worked the room with his loud laugh and deal-making energy. I saw her open her mouth once, like she was going to say something, then close it and turn back to the conversation around her. My father gave an informal speech at 7:15, standing near the fireplace with a champagne flute in hand. The photographer I'd hired captured it all, flash bursting in strategic moments. Family is everything. my father said, his voice carrying that particular blend of sentiment and authority he'd perfected over years of running a construction company. This house represents our legacy, what we've built together, what we'll pass on to the next generation. Applause rippled through the room. I stood in the back, my champagne untouched, and watched people nod and smile and believe the story they were being told. At 6 o'clock, an hour before guests arrived, I'd met with the AV technician in the villa's media room. Young guy, probably mid-20s, efficient and professional. "Screen and sound system ready?" I'd asked. He gestured to the large screen that descended from the ceiling at the touch of a button, invisible when retracted. "Presentation cued, Ms. Dawson. Just like you specified, press this remote and it'll run automatically. Audio is routed through the whole house system." Perfect. Now standing in the living room full of guests, I noticed the small security camera I'd mounted in the upper corner 3 weeks ago. The same system I'd used in my parents' townhouse, the same type that had recorded their conversation about moving me to the basement. This one had a perfect angle of the room capturing everything. The guests, the champagne, the performance of perfect family harmony. It had been recording since 6:30. At 7:25, Chen arrived. I saw him through the window, his silver hair catching the light from the driveway lanterns. He carried a leather briefcase, the kind lawyers used for important documents, and when our eyes met across the foyer, he gave me the smallest nod. Everything was in place. I checked my watch. 7:28. In 2 minutes, I'd scheduled the lights to dim automatically, a subtle cue that something was about to happen. The photographer would think it was atmospheric. The guests would think it was part of the evening's program. Only Chen and I would know what was really coming. The villa glittered around me like a jewelry box, all gold and crystal and carefully arranged beauty. Every face glowed in candlelight, warm and content and utterly unsuspecting. The string quartet played Vivaldi now, something light and celebratory. My mother laughed at something Mrs. Henderson said. My father shook hands with Andrew's business partner. Emily stood near the window, her champagne glass held delicately, looking like she belonged in a portrait of elegant living. Perfect. Untouchable. Exactly what they'd wanted. 1 hour ago, I'd activated the living room camera and synced it to the presentation system. It was recording everything. Every smile, every toast, every performance of the life they wanted people to believe they lived. The calm in the room wasn't peace. It was the held breath before the plunge, and I was about to push them all over the edge. The lights dimmed at precisely 7:30, just as I'd programmed them. The string quartet finished their piece and set down their instruments. Conversations quieted, faces turning toward the center of the room where Emily stood. Champagne glass raised her smile, perfectly calibrated for the moment. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she'd perfected in Manhattan. "To family, to legacy, to the love that binds us together. Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us." Glasses rose around the room. Murmurs of agreement, the soft clink of crystal. My mother beamed. My father nodded approvingly. I stood my own glass untouched in my hand. "I'd like to add to that," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "To truth, the foundation that holds it all." A few confused glances passed between guests. Someone laughed nervously, unsure if this was part of the program or something else. Emily's smile faltered slightly as she looked at me. I nodded toward the AV technician positioned near the media room door. He pressed the button, and the screen descended from the ceiling with a quiet mechanical hum. The large display came to life, blank and white, waiting. "Before we celebrate what we've built," I said, turning to address the room, "let's revisit where we started. This is from 3 weeks ago." I pressed the remote in my pocket. The screen flickered, then stabilized. Security camera footage, black and white with a timestamp in the corner. December 3rd, 10th, 47 p.m. The view showed the living room of my parents' townhouse, the furniture recognizable to anyone who'd visited them. The camera angle was high, looking down from a corner mount. 2 figures sat on the sofa. My parents, clearly visible, clearly identifiable. The audio came through the villa's sound system crystal clear, loud enough that every word carried to every corner of the room. My mother's voice first. Emily's family will move in after New Year. Clara can take the basement, she won't complain. She never does. I watched the guests' faces as they processed what they were hearing. Confusion shifting to attention, shifting to discomfort. My father's voice warm with amusement. That girl exists to make things easier for us. Always has. My mother's laugh light and careless. The basement she renovated with her own money. Ironic, isn't it? On screen, my father leaned back comfortable, completely at ease. She'll never question it. She's too grateful. The screen froze on their faces, both of them laughing caught mid-expression in the unflattering honesty of security footage. The silence in the villa was absolute. Even the caterers had stopped moving. My mother stood abruptly, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Her face had gone pale, 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. This is Clara. This is completely out of context. The context, I said, my voice still calm, still controlled, is that I was working 20 feet away from you, at the dining room table. You thought I was asleep. The camera you're seeing, I installed it in the living room to monitor basement renovation materials. Security measure. It auto-records when it detects motion. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I saw phones coming out, guests filming, the real estate weekly reporter's camera flash going off. The Meridian architecture partner had gone very still, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his mouth. My father found his voice, but it came out rougher than his usual smooth tone. Clara, this is a family matter. We can discuss this privately. You're absolutely right, I said. Let's discuss family. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the guests, with the people who'd come here expecting celebration and finding something else entirely. Mrs. Carter from dinner party memory, who'd praised Emily for taking care of her parents. Mr. Henderson, who'd nodded approvingly at Andrew's success mindset speech. The Patels, who'd smiled at my mother's pride in her instrumental daughter. Family, I continued, is what we're here to honor tonight. So let's be honest about what that means. 3 weeks ago, my parents decided to give my room to my sister, the room I'd been using for years. They decided I should move to the basement I renovated 2 years ago with $40,000 of my own money. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. They made this decision, I continued, while I was in the next room working on their company's finances. The finances I manage, the bills I pay, the mortgage I supplement every month. They assumed I'd never find out because I was, in their words, too grateful to question anything. Emily had set down her glass. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Andrew stepped back slightly from my father, creating physical distance, his networking smile completely gone. But that's not really why we're all here tonight, I said. That recording is just context. What we're really here to discuss is this house, this beautiful villa that my parents are so proud of, that my father just called our legacy. I gestured to the walls around us, to the exposed brick, the custom windows, the soaring ceilings. Before we talk about who built this legacy, I said, I want to make sure everyone understands what foundation we're standing on. And that foundation is truth. Not the story my parents have been telling. Not the performance we've all been watching. Truth. The room held its breath. My mother's champagne glass trembled so violently I thought it might shatter. Andrew had taken another step back from my father, his face calculating, already trying to figure out how to distance himself from whatever was coming. The guests stood, frozen champagne glasses half raised, caught between social obligation and growing fascination. And Emily. Emily was looking at me, not with the anger I'd expected, not with the defensiveness of someone whose position was threatened. Her expression was something else entirely. Recognition, maybe. Understanding dawning in her eyes. Or maybe even relief. But I wasn't done. The recording was just the overture. The symphony was about to begin. Chen stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the foyer, his leather briefcase in hand. The movement drew every eye in the room. He set the briefcase on the marble-topped side table and opened it with deliberate care. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Robert Chen, trustee for the Thomas Dawson Irrevocable Trust." His voice carried the authority of 3 decades practicing law, calm and unshakable. The screen behind me changed the frozen image of my parents' laughter, replaced by a legal document enlarged so every word was readable. In March of 2019, Thomas Dawson established a trust with one primary beneficiary, his granddaughter Clara Dawson. The first document filled the screen. I watched guests lean forward, squinting to read the formal language, the official seals, the signatures. "The primary asset held in this trust," Chen continued, "is the property located at 47 Riverside Drive, this villa, valued at $5.2 million. The beneficiary, as clearly stated in the trust documents, is Clara Marie Dawson. The trust became effective upon the grantor's death in April of 2019. My father's voice cut through the silence, sharp with panic. "That's not, we have documents. Legal documents that—" "Yes," Chen said, his tone unchanged. "A forged codicil." The screen split. On the left, a signature. On the right, another signature. Both read Thomas R. Dawson in that familiar architectural script. "This," Chen pointed to the left image, "is your father's actual signature from the original trust document dated March 2019. Note the slight tremor in the downstroke of the D, the wavering in the final N. Your father had early-stage Parkinson's disease. His hand tremor was subtle, but consistent." He moved his pointer to the right image. "This is the signature on the codicil your son filed with the county clerk's office in February of 2020. Notice the lack of tremor, the smooth, practiced strokes. This signature was forged." Gasps erupted around the room. I heard Mrs. Patel's sharp intake of breath, saw Mr. Henderson's face go pale. The photographer's camera flashed repeatedly, capturing my father's expression as understanding spread through the crowd. "I filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office this afternoon," Chen said. "Forgery of legal documents, fraud, and filing false instruments with a government office. These are felony charges." My mother's champagne glass hit the floor, shattering on the hardwood. She didn't seem to notice. She turned to me, her face a mask of fury and desperation. "You're destroying your own family, your own parents. How can you—" "I'm restoring what Grandpa built," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "He left me this villa because I designed it. In 2017, for a client I didn't know was him." I nodded to the AV tech again. The screen changed to a split image. On the left, architectural renderings, detailed drawings with measurements and notes. My signature in the corner, Clara Dawson CD Design Group, February 2017. On the right, photographs of the completed villa. The same asymmetric windows. The same exposed brick pattern. The same custom skylight. Identical. The murmuring in the room grew louder. I saw the architects from the AIA moving closer to the screen, studying the drawings. One of them, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd judged design competitions I'd entered, pulled out her phone and started comparing the images. Douglas Reed from Meridian Architecture had gone very still, his face draining of color. "Wait," someone said from the crowd. I recognized him. James Morrison, another architect who'd been on award panels. "That's Meridian Architecture's work. They won the Regional Design Excellence Award for this property in 2020. "It was my work," I said, turning to face him directly. "Meridian Architecture was hired to supervise permits and construction management. They were given my complete plans and told to execute them exactly as drawn. What they did after that, claiming the design as their own, accepting awards for it, featuring it in their portfolio as their innovation, that was intellectual property theft." Douglas Reed tried to speak, but no words came out. Patricia Chen was shaking her head, her expression hardening as she looked at him. "My grandfather knew," I continued. "He commissioned this design from me anonymously in 2017. He paid me fairly for the concept work. Then he legally purchased the full design rights from me through a shell company in 2019 before he died. He built this villa exactly as I drew it, every detail, every innovation. He left it to me in a trust because he wanted me to inherit something I'd already created. Chen's voice carried across the room again. Thomas Dawson wrote in his trust documents, and I quote, "I wanted to see if she'd recognize her own creation even when others claimed it. A true artist knows their work. A builder knows their bones. This house is hers because she built it first in vision, then in endurance." The room wasn't silent anymore. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass, conversations breaking out in urgent, hushed tones. I heard fragments. "She designed it. Her own parents forged. Meridian claimed. $5 million trust." The Real Estate Weekly reporter was typing furiously on her phone, her face intense with focus. Flash photography burst from multiple directions as guests documented what they were witnessing. I saw phones recording, capturing every moment, every revelation. My father reached for my mother's hand. She pulled away from him, her face crumbling champagne from the broken glass spreading across the floor around her feet, like evidence she couldn't clean up. Emily stood exactly where she'd been when she made her toast, her champagne glass still raised, forgotten in her hand. Her eyes were fixed on the split screen on my drawings next to the villa they'd become. Understanding was dawning across her face, piece by piece, like watching someone solve a puzzle they'd been staring at for years, without seeing the answer. Andrew had moved to the far side of the room, physically distancing himself from my parents, his networking smile completely erased. But the foundation was still cracking. The villa, the trust, the forgery, the design theft. These were just the first tremors. I had more truth to pour in, and the structure was about to collapse completely. I let the silence settle for a moment, watching the revelations sink in, watching the carefully constructed image of my family crack and splinter. Then I turned my attention to the next foundation that needed exposing. "Let's talk about family contributions," I said, my voice cutting through the whispers. "Mother, you've told people Emily helps you financially, correct?" My mother's head snapped up, her expression defensive, cornered. "Emily's been generous. How much has Emily given you total?" "Well, I don't have exact." "I do." I pulled out my phone, opened the spreadsheet I'd prepared. $5,000, once, December 2022. A birthday check with a lovely card about supporting the people who raised her right. My mother's mouth opened, closed. No words came. I turned to Emily, who'd gone very still, her champagne glass finally lowered. "The money you borrowed from them. Want to tell them, or should I?" Emily's face crumbled. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the way her expression collapsed, all the carefully maintained composure dissolving. The screen changed again. Email threads, timestamps visible, sender and recipient clear. The first email. Emily to father, dated December 10th, 2022. "Dad, I need $500K. Andrew's startup is underwater. Just temporary. I'll pay it back by spring." The second email. Emily to mother, dated December 12th, 2022, 2 days later. "Mom, I'm so glad I can help you both financially. You raised me right. Always taught me to take care of family." Gasps around the room. I heard Mrs. Carter's sharp intake of breath, saw Mr. Henderson shaking his head. Andrew moved toward the door, his face dark with humiliation and fury. He'd made it 3 steps before he encountered the security personnel Chen had quietly positioned there earlier. 2 professionals in dark suits, polite but immovable. "I'm afraid we need all guests to remain for the duration of the presentation," one of them said calmly. Andrew stopped, trapped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Emily told you she was helping," I said, looking at my mother. "Actually, she was taking, but that's not the deepest cut." The screen changed again. This time it was a corporate structure chart, the kind I created for clients to understand complex relationships between entities. Lines and boxes, names and dates, all meticulously documented. At the top, Dawson Builders. An arrow pointing down to Riverside Consulting LLC. Another arrow from Riverside to CD Design Group. Below that, a list of projects with dates spanning 2018 to 2024. Stadium renovation, Medical Plaza, Housing complex. 12 projects total. Riverside Consulting LLC, I said, letting each word land with weight. Sounds legitimate, doesn't it? Like a real client? It's not. It's a shell company my father created. I walked closer to the screen, pointing to the structure. Here's how it worked. Father made me believe I had an independent client. Riverside. Riverside hired me for projects that were actually Dawson Builders projects. Projects my father had contracted for that he needed architectural services for. The room was absolutely silent now, every eye on the screen on me. Riverside paid me what seemed like market rate. $800,000 over 5 years. Good money. I was grateful for the steady work, especially since father kept telling me family doesn't charge family for helping with Dawson Builders projects. I turned to face my father directly. But Dawson Builders charged their clients full architectural fees for my work. $4.2 million. You pocketed $3.4 million. My labor, my designs, my expertise, your profit. My father's face had gone red, then purple. I gave you steady work, a family rate. You were just starting out? I was 31 when you created Riverside, I said. I had my own established firm, and you didn't give me a family rate. You made me sign what I thought were authorization forms in 2019. They were actually incorporation documents making me the owner of Riverside Consulting LLC. Then you used my company to launder my own underpaid labor. Chen stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. I've filed a civil suit on behalf of Ms. Dawson for breach of contract and fraud. Discovery begins in January. We'll be subpoenaing all financial records related to Riverside Consulting LLC and Dawson Builders contracts from 2018 forward. Douglas Reed from Meridian was staring at my father with an expression of dawning horror, clearly calculating how his firm's association with Dawson Builders now looked. Patricia Chen had her phone out already, typing, probably messaging colleagues about the design theft revelation. The Real Estate Weekly reporter was recording everything her camera, capturing my father's face as he tried and failed to formulate a defense. You don't understand, my father said, his voice cracking. I built opportunities for you. I gave you projects. Without me. Without you, I built a successful firm anyway, I said. The $847,000 contract I just closed. That came from my reputation, my portfolio, my work. Not yours. I didn't need you to create opportunities. I needed you to stop stealing from the ones I created myself. Emily was crying now, silent tears running down her face, mascara tracking dark lines down her cheeks. But she wasn't moving toward Andrew, who stood fuming near the door. She wasn't defending our parents. She was just standing there, holding her champagne glass, watching everything fall apart. My mother's face had gone from red with defensive anger to ash white with dawning comprehension. The mathematics of it all hitting her. The years of manipulation. The systematic theft. The premeditation required to set up shell companies and forge documents and corporate structures designed to exploit your own daughter. My father tried to speak again, but his voice cracked, the words dissolving into something that wasn't quite language. Andrew was at the door, arguing in harsh whispers with security, trying to negotiate his exit from a situation that was destroying his carefully cultivated image. Emily was crying, but she wasn't moving to comfort him, wasn't even looking at him. I stood in the center of the villa I'd designed, surrounded by people who'd come expecting a celebration and found an excavation instead. Every layer of foundation exposed, every carefully hidden crack brought into the light. I should have felt triumph. Victory. The satisfaction of justice delivered in front of witnesses who couldn't dismiss it, couldn't explain it away, couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, I felt tired. Like an architect watching a building collapse in slow motion. Devastating, yes. Terrible to witness. But structurally inevitable from the moment the foundation had been compromised. You can't build a legacy on lies. Eventually, gravity wins. My father found his voice somewhere in the wreckage of his reputation. He stood, his face still purple with rage and humiliation, and pointed at me with a shaking finger. This is still our home. You can't just... Actually, Mr. Dawson. Chen said, his voice cutting through my father's bluster with surgical precision. It never was. The screen changed again. This time it displayed the trust terms in full enlarged, so every guest could read the fine print that had governed my parents' residency for 5 years. William and Margaret Dawson may reside in the Riverside Villa under these conditions. Chen read aloud, his finger tracing each line on the screen. 1. Property maintained in good faith. 2. No claims of ownership to be filed. 3. Beneficiary to be treated with respect and dignity as determined by trustee. Violation of any term results in immediate transfer of full ownership to beneficiary. The third condition was highlighted in yellow, impossible to miss. The recording from December 3rd, Chen continued, your own words about your daughter constitute a clear violation of Term 3. As trustee, I have determined that respect and dignity were categorically absent from your treatment of Ms. Dawson. I stepped forward, looking at my parents directly. You had 5 years to be kind. 5 years to treat me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed. You chose cruelty. Grandpa wrote these terms. You signed them when you moved in. My mother's voice rose shrill with panic. We didn't know about that clause. No one told us. Ignorance isn't a defense, Chen said. You received the full trust documents in April 2019 via certified mail. You chose not to read them. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying all night. The certified mail receipt dated April 15, 2019, with 2 signatures at the bottom. William Dawson, Margaret Dawson. Proof they'd received everything, read it or not. Your signatures, I said, holding it up for the room to see. My father lunged toward me, his hands reaching whether to grab the receipt or grab me, I wasn't sure. He made it 2 steps before security intercepted him, 2 professionals in dark suits stepping smoothly between us. Their presence calm but absolutely immovable. Sir, please step back, one of them said. Guests were backing away now, creating physical distance from my parents, the discomfort in the room palpable. The Patels had moved to the far wall. Mrs. Carter had her hand over her mouth. Even the caterers had retreated to the kitchen doorway, watching with wide eyes. Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal document, official letterhead visible from across the room. As of 7:47 p.m. tonight, Clara Dawson is the sole owner of this property. I'm serving you official eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. He handed the document to my father, who took it with trembling hands. I let that settle, watched my father's eyes scan the legal language he should have read 5 years ago. Then I said, oh, and one more thing, and the screen changed to a corporate structure chart, simpler than the shell company diagram, but no less damning. Dawson Builders 2019 Incorporation documents, I said. Father 49% Class A voting shares. Clara 51% Class B non-voting shares. My father looked up from the eviction notice, a flash of desperate hope crossing his face. See, she has no control, non-voting shares. I still run Clause 7B of the trust. Chen interrupted, pulling out yet another document. And I quote, upon the grantor's death, all beneficiaries' Class B shares automatically convert to Class A voting shares. The hope drained from my father's face like water from a broken vessel. I've been the majority voting shareholder since April 2019, I said. 5 years. You just never read the paperwork you made me sign. Those authorization forms that gave me signing authority, they also made me a shareholder. And when Grandpa died, my shares converted. I could have removed you any time in the last 5 years. I pulled out my phone, opened my calendar, made a new appointment with deliberate visible taps on the screen. As of tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting. Motion to remove William Dawson as CEO of Dawson Builders. I have 51% of voting shares. The motion will pass. My father's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed into the nearest chair, the eviction notice falling from his hands to the floor. The villa was completely silent, except for the quiet sound of the real estate weekly reporter typing, capturing every word, every revelation, every moment of this very public unraveling. The villa was mine. The company was mine. My grandfather had given them to me 5 years ago, and my parents had never known. They'd lived in my house, spent my money stolen, my work exploited my labor, and called me ungrateful for not giving more. Chen nodded to security. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Dawson from the property. The security professionals moved forward, professional but firm. My father didn't resist. He looked broken, diminished, a man who'd built his identity on control and discovered he'd never had any. My mother walked out with her head high, refusing to look at me. Her pride the last thing she had left to cling to. Emily followed them. Her makeup ruined, her perfect image shattered. She looked back once as she reached the door, her eyes meeting mine. I couldn't read her expression. Grief, maybe, or understanding, or just exhaustion. Then she was gone. Andrew had already slipped out, abandoning Emily to deal with her family's destruction alone, exactly the kind of man I'd known he was from the first dinner. The guests began to leave shortly after, murmuring excuses, thanking me with awkward formality for an evening they'd never forget. The architects left in a tight cluster, already talking in low, urgent voices about Meridian's theft, about industry ethics, about design credit. Douglas Reed left without saying goodbye to anyone, his phone pressed to his ear, already trying to control whatever damage was coming to his firm. Chen stayed until the last guest had gone, then began packing his briefcase with the same methodical care he brought to everything. You did well, he said quietly. I stood in the center of the villa, my design, every wall and window and beam, exactly as I'd drawn it 7 years ago. My grandfather's faith made solid in steel and stone and glass. The house I'd built twice, once in vision, once in endurance. The villa was mine. The company was mine. Justice had been served in front of witnesses who couldn't unsee it, couldn't explain it away, couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I should have felt victorious, powerful, free. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd torn down a building that had been sheltering me even as it suffocated me. Like I'd won everything and lost something I couldn't name. Chen closed his briefcase and looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. The hard part, he said, is what comes next. Then he left me alone in my villa, surrounded by the wreckage of the only family I'd ever known. The caterers moved through the villa like ghosts, their movements quiet and efficient as they dismantled the evidence of the party. White roses disappeared into boxes, their petals already beginning to brown at the edges. Crystal glasses clinked softly as they were packed away with practiced care. The champagne fountain was drained, the golden liquid that had sparkled under candlelight, now just sticky residue to be cleaned from marble and brass. I sat on the floor of the foyer in the exact spot where I'd sat 3 weeks ago when I'd first walked through this villa and recognized my own work in the walls. My party dress pooled around me, black silk on hardwood, and I couldn't remember deciding to sit down. My legs had just given out at some point after the last guest left, and I'd ended up here watching the caterers work around me like I was just another piece of furniture they needed to navigate. Chen's footsteps approached from the living room. I heard him before I saw him, the careful, measured tread of a man who knew how to navigate around broken things, around people who'd just detonated their entire lives in front of witnesses. The guests have left, he said quietly, his voice neutral and professional as always. The press is writing. I could imagine what they were writing. The headlines forming, the narratives being constructed, my family's destruction becoming tomorrow's news cycle. I nodded. Words felt too heavy to lift, too complicated to arrange into sentences. He stood there for a moment, his shadow falling across me in the dim light. Then he reached into his briefcase one more time. Your grandfather left something for you. For after. He held out a USB drive and a cream-colored envelope. The envelope had my name written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting, that familiar architectural precision, and below it, 3 words, when the dust settles. I'll check on you tomorrow, Chen said. Then he left his footsteps fading toward the door, and I was alone. I sat there for a while longer, listening to the caterers in the kitchen, the sound of running water, the clink of dishes being washed and packed, the mundane sounds of cleanup after catastrophe. Eventually they finished and let themselves out quietly, murmuring polite goodbyes I barely acknowledged, leaving me in complete silence. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff from sitting on the floor, my muscles protesting the movement. The villa felt enormous around me, all this space I'd designed for a client I'd never met for a purpose I hadn't understood. Every room echoed with emptiness now that the performance was over. I walked through it like a stranger, like someone touring a museum of their own life. My heels clicking on the hardwood I'd specified past the windows I'd angled for optimal light under the skylight I'd designed to create geometric shadows at noon. The architecture was mine, every detail, but it felt foreign somehow, haunted by what had just happened within these walls. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and stopped, startled by what I saw. The woman looking back at me didn't look like me. Same face, same dark hair pulled back, same black dress that had seemed so appropriate this morning when I'd chosen it. But something in the eyes was different, harder, maybe, or just tired, hollowed out. I couldn't tell which. Couldn't read my own expression anymore. I touched the exposed brick wall as I passed through the living room, my fingers tracing the industrial modern pattern I'd developed years ago. My pattern, my innovation, my signature that Meridian had stolen and my grandfather had honored. The brick was cool under my palm, solid and real in a way nothing else felt right now. In the corner near the fireplace, I found my mother's scarf. Burgundy silk, the one she'd worn tonight, probably slipped off in the chaos of leaving forgotten in her hurry to escape. I picked it up, the fabric soft and expensive between my fingers, slippery like water. It still smelled like her perfume, that floral scent she'd worn for as long as I could remember. Gardenias, maybe. Something old-fashioned and sweet. My father's reading glasses were on the side table, folded neatly, left behind in his hurry to escape the villa that had never really been his. I picked them up too, held them up to the light. The lenses were scratched, worn from years of use, the frames bent slightly from being sat on too many times. He'd needed new ones for months, but kept putting it off, and I'd been the one reminding him to make an appointment with the optometrist, the one managing even that small detail of his life. Something sharp and unexpected lodged itself in my chest. Not regret exactly, not even grief, though it felt similar. Just loss. The recognition that I'd burned down the only family structure I'd ever known, even if that structure had been built on lies and exploitation and casual cruelty. Even if it had been crushing me. I was free, I was vindicated. I was right. And I was completely alone. I left the scarf and glasses where they were, unable to decide what to do with them, and walked to the study. My grandfather's desk sat near the window, mahogany and solid, the kind of furniture that lasted generations, that outlived the people who'd used it. I made tea in the kitchenette, Earl Grey from a tin I found in the cupboard, the familiar ritual grounding me slightly, and brought it back to the desk. The USB drive felt small in my hand, almost weightless. I turned it over looking for markings, but it was blank except for a small label in my grandfather's handwriting, Clara, March 2019. 6 years ago, a month before he died. Right after he'd established the trust, bought my villa design set, all of this in motion, like dominoes he'd arranged, knowing exactly how they'd fall. I plugged the drive into my laptop and waited while it loaded, the small spinning wheel hypnotic in the darkness. One file appeared on the screen. For Clara, MP4, dated March 15, 2019. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Once I clicked this, once I heard whatever he'd recorded for me, there would be no more surprises from him. No more messages waiting. This was the last thing my grandfather would ever say to me, the final words across the gap of death and time. I hesitated, my tea growing cold beside me, the villa silent around me except for the distant hum of the refrigerator, the settling of old wood. Then I clicked. The screen went black for a moment, Then my grandfather's face appeared. He looked younger than I remembered, or maybe I'd just forgotten what he looked like before the illness took hold, before the Parkinson's stole his steadiness. His eyes were clear, sharp, the eyes of the architect who'd taught me to build birdhouses when I was 7 and told me that everything started with a solid foundation. He was sitting in this same study, at this same desk where I sat now. I recognized the window behind him, the view of the river that I'd designed to frame perfectly, not knowing I was framing the backdrop for his final message to me. He smiled, and it was the smile I remembered from childhood. Warm, proud, knowing. "Hello, builder," he said. And I started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd managed to hold back all night. Real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and breaks on the way up, the kind that shakes your whole body. My hands shook as I reached for tissues that weren't there, ended up pressing my palms against my eyes like that could stop it, like I could hold back the flood. Revenge, justice, truth. Whatever I wanted to call what I'd done tonight, it felt like ashes now. I'd won everything. The villa, the company, the public vindication, the proof that I'd been wronged and I'd been right and I'd been strong enough to reclaim what was mine. And I'd lost something I couldn't name. Something that had been broken long before tonight, but was now officially shattered beyond any possibility of repair. My grandfather's voice continued from the speakers, patient and steady, waiting for me to be ready to hear whatever he'd recorded 6 years ago for this exact moment, for the moment when I'd be sitting exactly where he'd known I'd be. I wiped my eyes, took a shaking breath, and looked at the screen. He was still smiling, like he'd known I'd need a moment. Like he'd known exactly what state I'd be in when I finally watched this, exactly how victory would feel when the adrenaline wore off and the silence settled. "Let me tell you," he said, "what happens next." My grandfather settled back in his chair, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. Even through the screen, even across 6 years, I could see the tremor in his fingers, the slight shake that the Parkinson's had brought. But his voice was steady. "Clara, if you're watching this, you passed. Not my test, life's test." He smiled, and it was sad and proud at the same time. "I watched you build that villa through your designs. I watched you pour your soul into blueprints for a stranger, never knowing that stranger was me. I wanted to see your vision pure without my influence, without you trying to please me or live up to what you thought I wanted. And what you created was extraordinary. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Every line, every angle, every innovation, that was you building something beautiful. Because that's who you are." I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to keep the sounds in, but they came anyway. Small broken sounds that I hadn't made since I was a child. "I watched you hold this family together with your wallet, your time, your silence," he continued. "I saw every bill you paid, every loan you co-signed, every project you gave away for free, because they told you family doesn't charge family. I saw it all, Clara, and it made me furious. Not at you, never at you. At them for taking. At myself for not stopping it sooner." His hands tightened on the desk, the tremor more pronounced. "I watched you stay kind when they were cruel. That's the part that broke my heart and made me proudest. You had every reason to become bitter, to harden, to match their cruelty with your own. You didn't. You stayed soft where it mattered. You kept building, kept creating, kept showing up, even when showing up meant being invisible." He paused, took a breath that I could hear rattle slightly in his chest. "The house is yours because you built it. Twice. Once in drawings when you poured your vision onto paper for a client you'd never meet. Once in endurance when you kept standing even as they tried to bury you. Both times you built something that could last. The company is yours because you've been running it for years without the title. I saw the books, Clara. I knew where the money was coming from, whose work was keeping Dawson Builders afloat. It wasn't your father's charm or your mother's connections. It was your competence, your designs, your reputation that brought in clients even when they thought they were hiring your father." My grandfather leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense on the camera, like he was looking directly at me across the distance of years and death. But here's what I really want you to know, what I need you to understand. You don't need revenge. You need release. I stopped crying for a moment, caught by the shift in his tone. They'll lose what they took because taking doesn't build anything. It just creates holes. Empty spaces where something real should be. Your father will lose the company because he never learned to run it himself. Your mother will lose her image because image without substance always crumbles. They'll lose these things not because you take them away, but because they never really had them to begin with. He sat back again, his expression softening. You'll gain what you always had. Your vision, your integrity, your hands that create. Those were never theirs to take. They tried to use them, to exploit them, to profit from them, but they couldn't take them from you. You carried them through everything. A pause. He looked down at his hands, then back at the camera. Don't let bitterness be your blueprint, Clara. I know what they've done. I know what tonight probably looked like public brutal necessary, and maybe it was necessary. Maybe they needed to see the consequences of their choices laid out in front of witnesses who couldn't pretend not to see. His voice grew gentler. But don't stop there. Don't let this be the end of your story. You're a builder, so build something beautiful with this. His eyes were wet now, tears gathering, but not quite falling. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. I should have spoken up sooner, should have intervened, should have stopped them from using you the way they did. I told myself I was teaching you resilience, preparing you to stand on your own. The truth is, I was a coward. I didn't want to face the fact that my son turned out to be the kind of man who would exploit his own daughter. A tear escaped, tracked down his weathered cheek. But I could prepare the ground. I could build the foundation, set the terms, create the structure that would support you when the time came. What you do with it now, that's your masterpiece. Not the villa, not the company. What you build next with the freedom I'm giving you, with the truth you've reclaimed. That's the architecture that will matter. He wiped his eyes, managed a shaky smile. I love you, Clara. Not for what you endured. Not because you were strong enough to survive them. I love you for who you remain despite everything. The girl who built a birdhouse with me when she was 7 and asked if birds cared about design. The woman who still puts beauty into her work even when no one's watching. The builder who creates because creating is who she is, not because anyone's paying attention. He reached forward, and the screen went black. The video ended. I sat there in the silence of the study of the villa, of the space my grandfather had built for me to inherit. Tears streamed down my face, dripped onto my black dress, spotted the mahogany desk. The emptiness I'd felt after my parents left, after the guests departed, after the triumph faded, it was still there. But it felt different now. Not like a void, like cleared ground. Space that had been occupied by something toxic, now empty and waiting for something else. I looked around the villa with new eyes. Not at the walls I'd designed, or the windows I'd specified, or the success I'd reclaimed. I looked at the space itself, the potential in it. This wasn't a trophy. It wasn't proof of my victory, or my grandfather's love, or my parents' betrayal. It was a tool. 6,000 square feet of possibility. A canvas stretched and waiting. I opened my laptop, my hands steadier now. Opened my design software, the one I used for client work for the buildings I created, that actually got built and changed the world in small ways. I started sketching. Rough lines at first, just thinking through the possibilities. The master bedroom could become 2 smaller rooms. The formal dining room could be converted to studio space. The basement, the foundation room, as I found myself thinking of it, could be a workshop. I added a title at the top of the document, The Dawson Home Preliminary Concept. Not my home. Not anymore. Not just for me. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me proof I already had one in my hands that could design anything in my mind, that could solve problems others couldn't see in my heart, that kept building even when buried under other people's expectations and cruelty. The villa wasn't an inheritance. It was a canvas. and I finally knew what to paint. I fell asleep at my grandfather's desk sometime around 3 in the morning, my head resting on my folded arms, the sketch of the Dawson home still glowing on my laptop screen. When I woke, pale winter light was streaming through the windows, and my neck was stiff from the awkward angle. Christmas morning, my 38th birthday. I dragged myself to the villa's guest room, the one I'd slept in the night I first explored the property. The bed was still made with the linens I'd put on it weeks ago, back when this was still my parents' house, and I was still planning my quiet revelation. I collapsed onto it fully clothed and slept for 4 more hours. When I finally woke properly, it was nearly noon. My phone sat on the nightstand where I'd left it, the screen dark and innocent-looking. I picked it up and watched it come to life. 47 missed calls. The number just sat there, absurd and overwhelming. I scrolled through the call log. My mother 6 times. Emily 3 times. Numbers I didn't recognize. A few industry colleagues. 2 journalists. The notifications were worse. News alerts, text messages, emails all piling up in a digital avalanche that had been building while I slept. I opened the news alerts first. Dawson family scandal, forgery, fraud, design theft, ran the headline from the New York Times Metro section. There was a photo someone had captured my father's face as security escorted him out. His expression a mixture of rage and devastation that would probably haunt me later, but right now just felt surreal. Another headline, Architect exposes father's shell company scheme. This one had a photo of the Villa My Villa with a caption explaining that the property at the center of the scandal had been designed by the daughter who'd exposed her family's crimes. Real Estate Weekly had gone with The Woman Who Built Her Own Inheritance. Clara Dawson's 7-year fight for recognition. I set the phone down, picked it up again, set it down. The unreality of it all was almost funny. Yesterday, I'd been the invisible daughter. Today, I was a headline. The text messages were a different kind of overwhelming. I scrolled through them slowly, not responding to any, just reading. Patricia Chen from the AIA. Clara, I had no idea. Your work has always been exceptional. If you need references for the Meridian situation, I'm here. Also would love to discuss collaboration on the Civic Center project. James Morrison. That villa is your design. It makes so much sense now. Meridian never could explain their process for that project. Call me when you're ready. 3 former clients of Dawson Builders all asking variations of the same question. Did William Dawson use stolen designs on our projects too? A message from Douglas Reed at Meridian Architecture trying to sound threatening through obvious panic. Your accusations last night were defamatory and legally actionable. Our attorneys will be in touch. That design work was produced under contract with... I deleted it without finishing. Then 3 messages from women I knew peripherally, all architects who'd faced their own battles with design theft, with being erased, with having their work claimed by men with more connections and louder voices. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for speaking up. I stared at those 3 identical messages for a long time, but the one that made me pause, the one that made my breath catch, was from Emily. Just 1 line sent at 4:47 a.m. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry. I looked at that message for a full minute, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, a dozen responses forming and dissolving in my mind. Finally, I just closed the messaging app without replying. I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I didn't know what to do with Emily's apology. Didn't know if it changed anything or if it was just another performance, another attempt to manage the narrative. I left my phone on the nightstand and went downstairs to make coffee. The villa felt different in daylight. Less like a stage, more like a space. Just rooms and windows and the river view I'd designed to be framed just so. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the water move the current, steady and indifferent to everything that had happened within these walls. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I considered not answering, just staying here in my quiet bubble of surreal calm. But the bell rang again, insistent. and I went to the door. A delivery driver stood on the step holding an enormous arrangement of white roses and a manila envelope. Clara Dawson. Yes. Sign here, please. I signed, took the flowers, and the envelope brought them inside. The card attached to the flowers was simple. Happy birthday. Your grandfather would be proud. Robert Chen. I set the flowers on the foyer table in front of my exposed brick wall and opened the envelope. Legal documents, the eviction notice officially filed and dated, a notice of the emergency shareholder meeting scheduled for January 3rd at 10 a.m., a letter from Chen's firm outlining the civil suit against my father for the Shell Company fraud, the timeline for discovery, the preliminary asset freeze they'd already filed. Everything was in motion. The legal machinery I'd set in motion last night was already grinding forward paperwork, generating paperwork consequences compounding into more consequences. I carried the documents to the study and set them beside my laptop. The sketch from last night was still open on the screen, my preliminary concept for the Dawson home. I sat down and started refining it. Added measurements, calculated square footage for each proposed room, sketched the conversion of the master suite into 2 smaller bedrooms each with its own bathroom. The formal dining room became a shared studio space with natural north light. The living room library I'd imagined last night took shape with built-in shelving, reading nooks, space for architectural reference books, and design software. The basement, the foundation room, became a workshop with proper ventilation space for model building, 3D printing, the physical tools of architectural creation. I worked for hours, lost in the familiar flow of design, of problem-solving, of creating something from nothing. My phone buzzed periodically on the nightstand upstairs. The world kept talking, kept reacting, kept having opinions about what I'd done and what it meant. And I was silent. For the first time in 38 years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Didn't feel the need to defend my choices or diminish my achievements or make myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Didn't feel the need to respond to every message, answer every question, manage everyone else's feelings about my truth. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of space I'd never had before. Space to think, space to create, space to decide what I wanted to build next, without anyone else's voice in my head telling me what I should want, what I should be grateful for, what role I should play. The world was talking. I was silent, and the silence felt like freedom. 3 days later, I was deep in the revised plans for the Dawson home when someone knocked on the villa door. I almost didn't answer. I'd been living in productive isolation, working on the design during the day, sleeping in the guest room at night, ignoring my phone, except for necessary communication with Chen about the legal proceedings. The world outside could wait. I was building something and I needed the silence to do it. But the knock came again, softer this time, hesitant. I saved my work and went to the door. Emily stood on the step, and for a moment I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were puffy and red, the kind of red that comes from days of crying, not hours. "Can I come in?" Her voice was small, tentative. We stood there in silence, me in the doorway, her on the step, the December cold air between us. I should have said no. Should have closed the door, gone back to my work, maintained the boundaries I'd just started to build. Instead, I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around the foyer like she was seeing it for the first time. Maybe she was. At the party she'd been performing. Now she was just here. We went to the living room, the space where 3 days ago everything had shattered. The caterers had cleaned up the broken champagne glass, but I could still see the faint watermark on the hardwood where it had spilled. We sat. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Emily spoke. "Andrew left 2 days ago. Took everything he could carry." I didn't respond. Didn't know what she wanted me to say. She nodded like my silence was an answer. "I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to be associated with this mess either." More silence. She pulled an old laptop from her bag, the kind that was several generations out of date, covered in stickers that had started to peel at the edges. "I need to show you something," she said. She opened it, waited for it to boot up with that grinding sound old computers make. Then she navigated to a folder buried deep in her documents. The folder name made my breath catch. Letters I Never Sent, 2009-2024. Inside were 47 text files, each one dated. "I started writing these when I was 16, Emily said quietly. "After you gave up your college funds so I could study abroad." She opened the first file. Her hands were shaking. Age 16. I see how they ignore her birthday. Every year cake and candles and songs for me. Every year Clara gets a card and maybe dinner if Mom remembers. I want to say something, but I'm scared they'll stop loving me too. My throat tightened. She clicked to another file. Age 19. Clara co-signed my student loan, $50,000. Dad told her I'd pay her back. I won't. I know I won't. She'll never ask. That's the worst part. She'll never ask because she doesn't want to make me uncomfortable. Another file. Age 24. She paid for my plane ticket to Paris again. $1,500 just like that because I said I missed it and couldn't afford to go back. I pretend I don't know she's struggling. I pretend I believe her when she says she's fine. I hate myself, but not enough to stop taking. Emily's voice was breaking now, but she kept reading. Age 29. Mom called Clara the plain one today at lunch. Clara was in the kitchen getting more coffee. She heard. I saw her face through the doorway, saw the way she stopped moving for just a second, that tiny flinch. I said nothing. I smiled and changed the subject to my new apartment, and Mom forgot Clara was even there. She opened another file newer. Age 35, I'm living a lie. Andrew's business failed. We're drowning in debt. We've maxed out 3 credit cards. But I post vacation photos from a trip we couldn't afford, and Mom shows everyone and says, Emily has it all. Clara has nothing and gives everything, and I take and take and take. The last file was dated a week before the party. Emily's voice was barely a whisper now. Last week, if she destroys us, I'll thank her. Maybe then I can finally breathe. Maybe then I can stop pretending. Maybe then Mom will stop looking at me like I'm her greatest achievement and see that I'm empty, that I've always been empty. She closed the laptop. Tears were streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking. I was too weak to save you, she said through the crying. Too scared to lose their love. I knew what they were doing. I saw it. I benefited from it. And I did nothing because being the golden child was the only thing I knew how to be. It's not an excuse. It's just true. I sat there watching my sister fall apart, feeling things I didn't want to feel. Anger, yes, but also something else. Something that felt dangerously like compassion. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Emily looked up, her face raw and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Because you deserve to know I knew. I wasn't innocent. I wasn't just oblivious or sheltered or unaware. I was complicit. I watched them use you, and I used you too. And I'm so fucking sorry. The words hung in the air between us. I wanted them to feel hollow, performative, another manipulation, but they didn't. They felt real, raw, true. We were both in cages, Emily said quietly. Mine was just prettier. The words settled into me like stones dropping into water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about my sister, about our family, about the story I'd been telling myself for 38 years. I'd spent years resenting her golden life. The attention, the praise, the ease with which she moved through a world that seemed designed to celebrate her. I'd seen the gilding and assumed it was solid gold all the way through. I never saw it was a gold-plated prison. She was right. She was weak. That wasn't absolution or excuse. Weakness had real consequences. Her weakness had cost me years of invisible labor, financial exploitation, emotional neglect. Weakness under pressure becomes complicity. Silence in the face of cruelty becomes participation in it. But sitting here looking at my sister's laptop full of unsent confessions, seeing her without the armor of makeup and designer clothes and practiced smiles, I understood something I hadn't before. We'd both been damaged by our parents' favoritism, just in opposite ways. I'd been made invisible. She'd been made into a performance. I'd learned I didn't matter. She'd learned she only mattered if she was perfect. The question wasn't whether to forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The question was, could the weak become strong? Could someone who'd spent their whole life in a cage learn to live outside of it? Could the person who'd been complicit become something else? Could the cage break from inside? I didn't know the answer. But sitting here with Emily in the villa I'd designed and reclaimed in the silence I'd finally found, I thought maybe it was worth finding out. Emily left an hour later. We didn't hug, didn't make promises about rebuilding our relationship or weekly coffee dates or any of the reconciliation rituals people do in movies. She just stood up, tucked her laptop back into her bag and said, "Thank you for letting me say that." I nodded. That was all I could offer right now. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but the recognition that she'd shown me something real. After the door closed behind her, I stood in the foyer for a long time looking at the space where my sister had just been. The conversation sat in my chest heavy and unresolved, raising questions I didn't have answers for. I went back to the study to my grandfather's desk. The video I'd watched on Christmas morning was still on my laptop, the file sitting in the folder. I opened it again, watched my grandfather's face appear on screen, heard him say, "Hello, Builder," for the second time. I let it play through, listening to his words about passing life's test, about building twice, about not letting bitterness be my blueprint. When it ended, I sat there with my hand on the trackpad about to close the file. That's when I noticed it. A second file in the folder. Phase 2 MP4. My heart stuttered. I'd been so overwhelmed the first time, so caught up in emotion that I hadn't looked beyond the first video. But there it was. More words from my grandfather waiting. I clicked. The screen showed the same study, the same desk, but my grandfather looked different. Tired, maybe. Or just more serious. He leaned forward, his trembling hands clasped together. "If you're watching this, you've reclaimed what was yours. Good." A slight smile crossed his face. "Now comes the harder part. What will you build?" He settled back in his chair, and I could see him gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with the same care he'd once brought to architectural drawings. "I'm leaving you wealth, Clara. $5 million in property-controlling shares in a company, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life if you're careful with it. But wealth is just potential energy. It's lumber and nails sitting in a warehouse. What matters is what structure you create." He gestured around him at the study at the villa beyond. "This villa, your villa, can be many things. A trophy, something you keep polished and empty, proof that you won. A revenge, bitter and satisfying, but ultimately hollow. A home comfortable and safe, but lonely if it's just for you." He paused, and his eyes seemed to look directly through the camera, through time, straight at me. "Or a foundation for something bigger than yourself." The words settled into me like seeds finding soil. "I built Dawson Builders to create shelter," he continued. "That was my purpose. To take empty lots and turn them into places where families could live, where children could grow up safe, where people could build their lives. You can build something to create builders. Not just buildings, Clara. Builders. People who create, who vision, who make the world more beautiful and functional, one structure at a time." He leaned forward again, and I saw the emotion in his eyes. "The choice is yours. No one can make it for you. But ask yourself, what would the girl who designed this villa, pure hopeful visionary, full of ideas about what spaces could become, what would she build if she had no fear?" The screen went black. I sat there in the silence, my grandfather's question hanging in the air like a blueprint waiting to be drawn. What would she build if she had no fear, I thought about that girl. 31 years old, excited about a commission from an anonymous client, pouring everything she knew into drawings for a villa she thought would never be built. She'd designed spaces for connection, for light, for possibility. She'd created rooms that could become whatever their inhabitants needed them to be. She'd been building for others even then, even when she thought no one was watching. I walked to the filing cabinet where I'd been storing my work from the past few days. Pulled out the sketches I'd made on Christmas night, the preliminary concept for the Dawson home. The drawings were rough, but the bones were there. The master suite divided into 2 bedrooms. The formal dining room transformed into studio space. The living room as a library, the basement as a workshop. But it was incomplete. Not wrong, just not fully realized. I sat down and started refining. Not the Dawson home. The Dawson Home for Women Architects, a residency program. 6 months of housing and studio space for women architects who were rebuilding after setbacks. Divorce that had cost them their financial stability. Bankruptcy from failed ventures. Industry discrimination that had pushed them out of firms and left them struggling to find work. Design theft like I'd experienced. Burnout from years of invisible labor. Women who needed space and time and support to remember who they were beneath all the ways the world had tried to diminish them. The program took shape under my pencil. Each resident would have her own bedroom, her own workspace, shared common areas for collaboration and community, mentorship from established architects who understood the specific challenges women faced in the industry, portfolio development support, connections to potential clients and projects, not charity. Investment. 6 months to rebuild, to rediscover their vision, to remember they were builders. Then they'd move on and new residents would come. A continuous cycle of renewal of women, helping women of creating space for creation. I added details. The foundation room, the basement where my parents had wanted to bury me, would be where every resident started. Literally and symbolically. Building from the ground up. Understanding that foundations matter, that what's beneath the surface determines what can stand above it. When I had the concept sketched out clearly enough to communicate, I opened my laptop and composed an email to Chen. Robert, I want to establish a foundation, a nonprofit to run a residency program for women architects. The villa will be the physical home. I'll need legal structure, tax status, governance framework. Can we talk? I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My grandfather had built this villa for one woman to reclaim herself. I'd open it for thousands to rebuild themselves. Not a monument to pain. Not a trophy case for my victories or a shrine to my suffering. A factory for phoenix rising. A place where women could come broken and leave building. The basement room they'd thrown me in, the space they'd used to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to make me small and grateful and invisible. That's where we'd start. Because every structure needs a foundation. And the strongest foundations are built by people who understand what it means to rise from the ground up. 2 months later, the villa was a construction site again. But this time, I was the one directing the transformation, making decisions about which walls to keep and which to tear down, choosing where light should fall and how spaces should flow. I stood in what used to be the master bedroom reviewing plans with the architect I'd hired to oversee the renovation. Her name was Margaret Torres, 53, with silver streaks in her dark hair and 30 years of experience designing institutional spaces that felt human. She understood what I was trying to build, not just a residence, but a place where women could remember who they were before the world told them who they had to be. The master suite divides here, she said, pointing to the blueprints spread across a makeshift table balanced on sawhorses. 2 bedrooms each with its own bathroom, south-facing windows in both. We'll lose some square footage, but the light is worth it. The light is everything, I agreed. I'd learned that from my grandfather. Natural light changes how you feel in a space, how you work, how you dream. Chen arrived mid-morning, stepping carefully around sawhorses and painters' tarps, his polished shoes somehow still pristine despite the construction dust. He carried a folder I recognized applications for the residency program. The first 3 residents have been selected, he said. Want to meet them? My heart kicked up. This had been theoretical for weeks, just plans and paperwork and renovation schedules, blueprints and budgets and nonprofit bylaws. Now it was about to become real. Actual women with actual stories would walk through these doors and claim these spaces as their own. Yes. They arrived an hour later. 3 women, 3 stories. 3 reasons they needed what I was offering. Maria was 34 with tired eyes and hands that fidgeted constantly with her portfolio bag. Chen had told me her story divorced 6 months ago, lost the house in the settlement. Brilliant, sustainable designer who'd been working from coffee shops because she couldn't afford studio space. Her ex-husband was a lawyer. He'd known exactly how to make sure she walked away with almost nothing. Joy was 52. A black woman with gray locks and 3 decades of experience that should have made her invaluable. Instead, she'd been forced out of her firm last year ageism dressed up as restructuring. She'd been applying to jobs for 8 months with no callbacks. Every rejection email used the same phrases about cultural fit and team dynamics. She knew what they really meant. Sarah was 28, a single mother with a 6-year-old daughter and student loans that were crushing her. Laid off from her firm when they lost their biggest client, she'd been doing freelance work that barely covered childcare, let alone rent. She was 1 missed payment away from eviction when Chen had called her about the program. I showed them through the villa, through the construction chaos, pointing out what each space would become, helping them see past the dust and exposed wiring to the possibility underneath. This was my grandfather's room, I said to Maria, standing in what would be her bedroom. The walls were still bare studs, but the bones were good. South light, perfect for rendering. The window seat is original. He used to sit there and sketch. I'm having it restored. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything, just nodded and touched the window frame with something close to reverence. We walked to the former dining room, now being converted to studio space. Shared work area, I explained. 6 drafting tables, software licenses, plotting printer material samples library, everything you need to build a portfolio that shows what you can really do. Joy touched one of the tables already installed. I haven't had desk space in a year, she said quietly. I've been designing on my kitchen table, moving my laptop every time my grandson visits, so we have room for dinner. The library in the former living room was still being built out, custom shelving going up along the walls, where guests had once stood with champagne glasses watching my family fall apart. Architecture reference books, design magazines, historical archives, and comfortable places to just think. Sometimes the best work happens when you're not at a desk. Sarah was looking around like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. This is all for us, for you and for the women who come after you. Then I took them to the basement, the foundation room as the plans now labeled it. The renovation was further along here, new lighting installed, walls freshly drywalled and primed, waiting for paint. The workshop area was taking shape in the corner space for model building, 3D printing, the physical work of creating. The same space where I'd sat 2 months ago listening to my family laugh upstairs while they planned my humiliation. This basement, I said, and had to stop, had to breathe. My parents wanted to bury me here, thought they could put me underground and I'd disappear. We're calling it the foundation room, because this is where every project starts, where every resident starts, the ground floor of rebuilding. The 3 women stood in the space, looking around, understanding settling over their faces. They'd all been buried somewhere, under debt, under discrimination, under the weight of other people's expectations. What's the catch? Maria asked finally. There has to be a catch. I'd been waiting for this question. Women who'd been hurt learned to look for traps. No catch. 6 months rent-free. You work on your portfolio, rebuild your client base, remember who you are as an architect. We connect you with potential projects, provide mentorship, handle the admin work so you can focus on design. At the end of 6 months, you move on. And then you pay it forward, you mentor the next resident or the one after that. You help build the next generation of builders. That's it. Joy's voice was skeptical, protective. She'd been burned before. That's it. Maria was crying now, not trying to hide it. I thought I was done. I thought, after the divorce, after losing everything, I thought architecture was over for me. I looked at her, at all three of them, and saw myself reflected in different ways. Different setbacks, different struggles, but the same core wound being told in one way or another that they didn't belong, didn't matter, couldn't build. "You're not done," I said. "You're just starting. So am I." The doorbell rang, echoing through the construction chaos. I wasn't expecting anyone else. I found Emily on the doorstep, holding paint sample cards, wearing jeans and a t-shirt I'd never seen her in before. No designer labels, no careful styling, just my sister stripped of all the performance. "You mentioned you might need help with interior work," she said. "I'm not busy." We stood there for a moment. 2 months since she'd shown me those letters. We'd texted occasionally, brief messages, nothing deep. This was the first time I'd seen her in person. "Can you paint?" I asked. "I can learn." I considered her. The sister who'd been complicit in my burial, who'd benefited from my invisibility, who'd shown me her own cage and asked for nothing in return except acknowledgement. "Foundation room needs primer," I said. "White, 2 coats." Emily's face opened up, relief and gratitude mixing with something that might have been hope. "I can do that." The villa stopped being mine the moment I made it ours. 6 women now, 6 stories, 6 second chances, including my own. Maria started measuring her new room, pulling out the tape measure she'd brought in her bag like she'd been afraid to hope, but prepared anyway. Joy was already sketching ideas for the studio layout, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd been designing for 30 years. Sarah was on the phone with her ex-husband, explaining she'd found housing her voice stronger than when she'd arrived. And Emily rolled up her sleeves and started painting the foundation room walls. The room I'd built with my own money. The room they'd wanted to bury me in. The room we'd resurrect from again and again every 6 months, every new resident, every woman who thought she was done discovering she was just beginning. My grandfather was right. Builders don't need revenge, they need blueprints. And I had plenty of those. March came with gray skies and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I'd been putting this off for 3 months, finding reasons to delay, to wait just 1 more week to let things settle a bit more. But the Dawson home was opening in 2 weeks, and Maria, Joy, and Sarah would be moving in. Emily had finished painting the foundation room and started helping with furniture assembly. Chen had finalized all the nonprofit paperwork. The villa was becoming what it was meant to be, and I was still carrying this weight. I drove to Queens on a Tuesday afternoon to the address Chen had given me when I'd asked weeks ago where my parents had landed. A modest apartment building, the kind with buzzers that half worked and a lobby that smelled like old carpet. Nothing like the townhouse, nothing like the villa, just a place to live. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 10 minutes, my hands on the steering wheel almost turning back 3 separate times. Then I got out and crossed the street before I could change my mind again. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. I took the stairs, my heart beating too fast, and stood outside their door for another full minute before knocking. My mother opened it. Her face when she saw me went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, defensiveness. Something that might have been hope before settling on careful neutrality. "Clara." Just my name. No warmth, no coldness. Just acknowledgement. "Hi, Mom." She stood there in the doorway and I could see past her into the small apartment. My father at a kitchen table that was too small for the space papers spread in front of him. He looked older. Smaller somehow. Tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. "I'm not here to fight," I said. My mother's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Then why are you here?" I took a breath. "Because I'm tired of hating you. It's exhausting." The words hung in the narrow hallway. My mother's face crumpled slightly, then smoothed. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." The apartment was maybe a quarter the size of the townhouse. Furniture that didn't quite fit the space boxes still unpacked in corners, the air of temporary living, even though they'd been here for 3 months. My father looked up when I entered, and I saw the same aging I'd noticed from the doorway. gray at his temples that hadn't been there before Christmas, lines around his eyes that looked carved rather than drawn. "Clara," he said, "just my name like my mother had." Like they didn't know what else to say. I sat down at the small table, uninvited, claiming space. "I heard you lost the company." My father's jaw tightened. "The board voted me out. January 15th. They kept the Dawson Builders name, but I'm no longer CEO." I knew. Chen had told me. The board had acted independently after the scandal, wanting to distance the company from my father's fraud. I'd abstained from the vote, let them make their own decision. "We thought we were protecting Emily," my mother said suddenly, still standing by the door. "The pretty one, the charming one. We thought she needed us more, needed our support, our attention, our—" She trailed off. "She needed you less," I said quietly. "I needed you more. That's the difference." My father's hands were flat on the table, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. "I didn't know how to—" He started again. "You were always so competent, so capable. You didn't seem to need anything from us. You just handled things." "Everyone needs their father to be proud of them," I said. "I just learned to stop showing it." Tears spilled from my father's eyes. I'd never seen him cry. Not when his own father died, not at any moment of stress or grief or loss in all my 38 years. But he was crying now, silent tears tracking down his weathered face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." My mother moved, then went to a closet I hadn't noticed, pulled out a cardboard box. She set it on the table between us, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were my grandfather's architecture books, the ones that had been in the basement that I'd looked at the night I moved down there. But also things I hadn't seen photographs. My grandfather and me, age 7, building that birdhouse in his garage. Both of us smiling sawdust in our hair. My small hands holding a hammer too big for them, his larger hands guiding mine. There was a note attached to one photo written in my grandfather's careful script. "First builder, age 7. He saw you," my mother said, her voice thick. "He saw who you were, what you could become. We didn't. We looked right at you and didn't see anything. I'm sorry isn't enough." "No," I agreed. "It's not." The words sat there honest and hard. "But it's a start," I added. I didn't hug them, didn't tell them everything was fine or that we could go back to being a family. Didn't promise Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings, or any of the reconciliation theater people do when they want to pretend wounds heal cleanly. But I sat, and when my mother made tea, I accepted a cup. "What you're doing with the villa," my father said after a long silence. "The women's residency program. It's good work." "Thank you." "The article in the Times mentioned you're adding an accessibility ramp." He looked down at his tea. "I used to do that kind of work. Before I got too focused on the business side, I was good at it." I considered him. This man who'd stolen from me, who'd forged documents, who'd exploited my labor and my love. Who was also just a person who'd made terrible choices and was now living with the consequences. "I'm hiring contractors next week," I said. "You still do that work?" He looked up, surprise clear on his face. "You want me to—" "I want you to build something," I said. "It's what you're good at when you're not stealing." For a moment I thought he'd be offended. Then a small smile crossed his face, sad and genuine. "Fair," he said. I finished my tea, told them I'd send the ramp specifications, stood to leave. At the door my mother touched my arm. "We won't be what we were." "No," I agreed. "We won't." I didn't need them to become different people. I needed them to see who I'd always been. And maybe in that cramped Queen's apartment with unpacked boxes and too small furniture, they were finally starting to. We wouldn't be the family they'd pretended we were. The perfect picture, the holiday cards, the performance of togetherness. But maybe we could be something real. Scarred, honest, still building despite everything. Not close, maybe never close again. But not enemies. Not weights I had to carry. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's deciding the weight isn't worth carrying anymore. And I had other things to build. December 24th came around again with the inevitability of all anniversaries. Exactly 1 year since the party that had torn everything down. Exactly 1 year since I'd stood in this villa and exposed every lie my family had built. This time, the villa looked different. We'd decorated for Christmas, but not the way my mother used to. No champagne fountains or string quartets or performances of perfection. Just white lights strung along the windows, evergreen garlands that Sarah's daughter had helped arrange, candles that Maria had chosen because they smelled like pine and winter. It wasn't a party, it was a gathering. Maria was in the kitchen with Joy, both of them arguing good-naturedly about whether the sweet potato casserole needed more marshmallows. Maria had landed a $2 million Civic Center contract 3 weeks ago, her sustainable design beating out firms 10 times her size. She still lived in the villa, but she'd be moving out in January, making room for the next resident. Joy had opened her own firm in October. Small, just her and 3 women she'd hired, all of them over 40. All of them pushed out of other firms for reasons that had nothing to do with their talent. She visited the villa twice a week to mentor the current residents. Her gray locks always tied back with bright scarves that made her look regal. Sarah was at the table helping her daughter with a gingerbread house frosting everywhere, both of them laughing. She worked part-time at an architecture firm, now went to school at night to finish her degree. Her daughter had started first grade this year, thriving in a stability they hadn't had 12 months ago. The 3 new residents were quieter, still settling in. Keisha divorced and rebuilding. Lynn, who'd lost her job to AI-driven downsizing and was reimagining her whole approach to design. Patricia, 61, forced into early retirement, refusing to be done. They watched the easy warmth between the established residents with the careful hope of people who'd been disappointed before. Emily arrived early, as she always did now. She worked part-time as the residence coordinator, handling applications and schedules, and the 1,000 small logistics that kept the program running. She'd enrolled in a social work program at NYU, taking night classes, learning a different way to help people build their lives. We weren't close. Probably would never be close in the way sisters in movies are. But we were something. We showed up. That counted. My parents arrived at 6, my father carrying a pie my mother had made. They visited once a month, now awkward dinners where we all worked hard at being civil. My father had built the accessibility ramp in March. Donated his labor, did beautiful work that reminded me he'd once been good at building things before he'd gotten lost in shortcuts and exploitation. They sat on the periphery of the gathering, not quite part of it, but no longer excluded. My mother helped set the table. My father talked shop with Maria about her Civic Center project, offering advice she was gracious enough to pretend she needed. Chen arrived last, bringing his granddaughter. May was 19, a sophomore at Cooper Union studying architecture. She looked around the villa with the hungry eyes of someone who wanted to understand how spaces worked, why they mattered. "This is incredible," she said to me. "The way you converted the residential flow into institutional without losing the warmth." I smiled. "Want to see the foundation room?" At 7, we gathered in the living room that was now a library. Not everyone fit on the furniture, so some people sat on the floor, comfortable and casual. Sarah's daughter was showing May her gingerbread house. The new residents sat together, still a unit unto themselves. I stood near the fireplace, no formal podium, no prepared remarks. Just truth. "A year ago," I said, "in this room I tore down a lie. Tonight we're building truth." Faces turned toward me. Maria and Joy, who knew this story. The new residents who'd heard pieces. My parents who'd lived through it from the other side. 12 women have come through this house in the past year. 12 women are working now, building, thriving. Some have moved on. Some are still here. Some will come next. I looked around the room at the faces that had become familiar, that mattered. This isn't charity. It's circulation. We were all buried somewhere, under debt, under discrimination, under divorce, under doubt. Under other people's expectations of who we should be and what we could become. Sarah nodded. Lynn was crying quietly. The question was never if we could climb out. It was if we'd help each other dig. Maria stood up, raising her water glass. To Clara, who showed us that the basement is where foundations are laid. Others raised their glasses. Juice, water, wine, tea, whatever was closest. Emily stood next, her voice steady. To my sister, who taught me that strength isn't what you're born with. It's what you build brick by brick, even when no one's watching. Then my father stood. His hands were shaking. His voice broke when he spoke. To my daughter, I'm sorry I didn't see you. I see you now. It wasn't forgiveness. Not complete, maybe not ever complete. But it was acknowledgement. It was him showing up month after month trying to earn back something he'd lost through his own choices. I didn't cry. But I smiled, and it was real. The evening dissolved into comfortable chaos. Dishes passed conversations, overlapping laughter rising from different corners of the room. Sarah's daughter and May disappeared to the foundation room, and I could hear them down there, May explaining load-bearing principles, while Sarah's daughter asked if you could make a house shaped like a castle. Snow started falling outside, visible through the windows I'd designed to frame the river view. I stood at those windows, watching the snow, feeling the warmth of the gathering behind me. Chen appeared at my shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. I know. Are you? I thought about it. About the 12 women who'd passed through these doors. About Emily painting walls and my father building ramps. About Maria's civic center and Joy's firm and Sarah's daughter doing homework at the kitchen table. About the foundation room where everything began, where it would begin again every 6 months with new residents, new stories, new chances. Yeah, I said. I am. Last Christmas I'd stood in a basement they'd thrown me into, buried, humiliated, invisible. This Christmas I stood in a foundation we'd all built together. No ghosts haunting the corners, no gold plating covering rot. Just honest wood, honest work, honest love. The kind you earn by showing up month after month even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because that's what builders do. We show up. We lay foundations. We create spaces where people can become who they're meant to be. And then, we do it again. By 11, the gathering had begun to wind down. The new residents had excused themselves to their rooms, still adjusting to the rhythms of communal living. Maria and Joy left together, still debating architecture philosophy, their voices fading down the driveway. Sarah bundled her daughter into a winter coat and drove home to the apartment they could finally afford. My parents left quietly, my mother pausing at the door to squeeze my hand briefly before letting go. My father nodded a small acknowledgement that we'd made it through another gathering without breaking. Chen and May were the last to go, May clutching a folder of sketches she'd made in the foundation room, her eyes bright with the kind of hunger I recognized from my own younger self. Then it was just me and Emily and the quiet villa settling around us. I stepped out onto the balcony off the master bedroom. No, not the master bedroom anymore. Just the upstairs sitting room we used for quiet conversations and late-night work sessions. The December air bit at my skin sharp and clean. Snow was still falling, fat flakes that caught the light from the city across the river, turning everything soft and muted. The water moved below, dark and constant, reflecting the lights of Manhattan in fractured patterns that shifted with each ripple. I stood there watching it, and my mind drifted backward through the years like someone flipping through photographs. Age 7 in my grandfather's garage, both of us bent over that birdhouse, his large, weathered hands guiding my small, clumsy ones. The smell of sawdust and wood glue, his voice saying, "Every structure needs a foundation, Clara. Always start there." Age 31. Sitting in a coffee shop with my laptop designing a villa for client R, not knowing I was drawing my own future. The hope in those drawings, the purity of creating something beautiful, just because I could. Age 38, a year ago, sitting on a basement floor, listening to my family laugh upstairs while they planned to bury me. The humiliation settling into my bones, turning into something harder. Something that would break open. Age 38, still standing in this same villa while champagne glasses shattered and truth spilled out like light through cracks in a wall. The moment everything changed. Age 39 now, snow falling, peace settling. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. The balcony door opened behind me. Emily stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "Cold out here," she said. "Yeah." She stood beside me at the railing, both of us looking out at the river at the falling snow. The silence between us was comfortable now. We'd learned that we didn't always need to fill the space with words. "Think we'll ever be?" Emily paused, searching for the right phrase. "Normal sisters." I considered the question. "I don't know what that means, but we're here. That's something. It's more than something." We stood together, not touching, but together nonetheless. Two women who'd been raised in the same house but lived in different cages, learning how to exist in the same space without those bars between us. I looked back at the villa, at the warm light spilling from windows, at the architecture I'd created, without knowing I was building my own salvation. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I designed this place thinking I was creating someone else's dream. Turns out I was building my own home. I just had to lose it to find it." Emily glanced at me, a small smile playing at her lips. "That's very poetic for an architect." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "Grandpa always said buildings are frozen music." "What's this one singing?" I thought about it. About the 12 women who'd walked through these doors broken and left building. About my grandfather's test and my parents' lies and the truth that had burned everything down so something new could grow. "Phoenix song," I said finally. "The one that rises." Emily nodded, understanding in a way only someone who'd also risen from ashes could. We stood there a while longer, then went back inside together, leaving our footprints in the fresh snow on the balcony already being covered by new flakes. If you could see us from above, from some impossible vantage point, you'd see the villa glowing in the winter darkness. Snow falling like grace. Two sisters on a balcony, separate but together, learning what family means when you strip away all the lies. Inside in the foundation room, a plaque hung on the wall now. Bronze simple words I'd chosen carefully with Chen's help. If you were there, you could read it: "The Dawson Home Est, 2025. Built by Clara Dawson, 2017. Reclaimed by Clara Dawson, 2024. Shared by women builders forever. A basement is where foundations are laid." And if you went down to that foundation room now in the quiet after everyone had left, you'd see the drafting table where Sarah's daughter and May had been drawing earlier. A piece of paper still there, crayon marks bright against white. A house with many windows. Sun shining overhead, rays drawn in yellow that radiated like hope. And stick figures holding hands, a chain of them circling the house, protecting it, or maybe being protected by it. In a child's careful printing at the bottom, "Home." My grandfather's voice echoes in my memory, words from that video I've watched a dozen times now. "A home isn't where you live, Clara. It's where you heal, and then help others do the same." They took my room when I was 38 years old, wanted to bury me in a basement, make me small and grateful and invisible. I built a house instead. Built it years before I knew what it was for, poured my vision into blueprints for a stranger who turned out to be the one person who always saw me clearly. Then I built something bigger. A home. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been told they were too much or not enough, too old or too inexperienced, too damaged or too different. That's what builders do. We don't just make shelter from weather, from rain and wind and cold. We make shelter from the other kind of cold. The kind that comes from being unseen, unvalued, told your work doesn't matter, and your dreams don't count. We make spaces where people can remember who they are, and then we teach them to build their own. The snow keeps falling outside. The villa stands solid, my design holding strong against another winter, ready for another year of women finding their way back to themselves. Inside the foundation room waits. Tomorrow, Keisha will be down there early, starting her first real project in 6 months. Lynn will join her after breakfast. Patricia will spend the afternoon teaching them both the tricks she learned over 30 years in the industry. And in 6 months, they'll move on. New women will come. The cycle will continue. Building, breaking, rebuilding. Foundation structure home. The Dawson home has helped 47 women architects rebuild their careers so far. Some have moved across the country. Some have opened their own firms. Some have gone back to firms that wouldn't have hired them before, armed with portfolios strong enough to demand respect. It's still standing. Still building. And so am I. So that's Clara's story. From the basement, they tried to bury her into the foundation she built for others. From invisible daughter to architect of her own destiny. Some of you might be wondering if this really happened, if families can truly be this cruel, or if redemption can be this complete. The truth is, every family has its own architecture of pain and love, its own blueprints for breaking and building. Clara's story reminds us that sometimes the strongest foundations are laid by those who've been pushed to the ground. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or undervalued in your work, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to reclaim something that was rightfully yours? Have you experienced the complicated journey from revenge to forgiveness? Share your story with our community. And if you made it this far, if you stayed with Clara through all 25 parts of her journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future stories about resilience, justice, and the courage it takes to rebuild from the ground up. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. What did you think of Clara's decision to transform the villa into a home for other women architects? Would you have done the same, or would you have chosen differently? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, remember that builders don't just create structures. They create possibilities.